Just 2 days before Halloween, on an otherwise ordinary, cold October night in Johnstown, New York, in 2019, 22-year-old Elizabeth Lamont clocked in for her shift at a local deli, never suspecting that anything out of the ordinary would happen to her that day. Ally was seemingly loved by everyone in her life. She had a close circle of family and friends and a positive relationship with her new boyfriend. She was working hard to save some money and carve out a space in the world that was her own. Little did she know that, among the people in her everyday life, there was a sinister plot lurking beneath the surface. Today, I'll be introducing you to Elizabeth Lamont. The first thing I noticed was the spelling of her name. It's not the traditional Elizabeth with an E. No, it's spelled Elizabeth. I've never seen Elizabeth spelled this way, and I think it's really cool. Definitely stands apart. Elizabeth Ann Lamont was born in Johnstown, New York on December 4th, 1996, to her parents, Sherman and Krista Lamont. Elizabeth had 3 sisters, 2 older sisters, Carly, who was 3 years older, and Lou Ellen, who was about a year older than her. She also had a little sister who was 2 years younger, named Brooke. She was close to all of them. She considered her sisters her best friends. They had a really special and strong bond. The Lamont family lived in Gloversville, a small town in Saratoga County, north of Albany, in upstate New York. Now, I've never heard about this area before, and you know how interested I am in understanding the life that people live in these cases. When I think of upstate New York, I think of Syracuse, but Gloversville is not quite like that area. It's a pretty small town from what I could see. There was only one elementary, middle, and high school, which means everyone who lived there would be somewhat familiar with people they grew up with, going to school together, and moving through that single educational system. The average income in this area is around $40,000 a year, and most people rent places instead of purchasing homes because the property tax is actually really high, among other reasons, of course. The job opportunities in the small town are not many, and sadly, it's reported that over 16% of the residents there are actually living in poverty. What the Lamonts did not have in wealth, they made up for with strong relationships. They valued family, and they leaned on one another for support. Now, Elizabeth's friends and family knew her as Ally, and that's what she preferred to be called. So, from here on out, that is what I'm going to do as well. Ally attended Gloversville High School, and from her Facebook profile, she began attending in 2011. She had many close friends. They took a lot of photos together, and they looked like typical teens, having fun in between going to school and figuring out what they wanted to do after graduation. Growing up in a very supportive environment helped Ally develop a strong sense of community and a desire to help others. Allie's dad, Sherman, described his daughter as someone who always stood up for others and looked after people. He admired her selflessness and her willingness to put others' needs before her own. Everyone close to Ally agreed she was a remarkable young woman who had strong connections with people in her life. Ally deeply understood the importance of caring for others, and she was always there to help. Ally was more than just a familiar face in Gloversville. She was a symbol of the small-town spirit that held this community together. By all accounts, she loved her hometown, and she didn't have any desire to leave, not even for a brief time. And it's not all the time we hear that. We usually hear the small-town girl wanted the big city life. But Ally, she wasn't like that. Within the confines of this cozy little city, it seemed that Ally found everything that she needed. Once she became an adult, she took the next step towards independence by moving out of the family home. But Ally's heart always remained close to those that she loved. Never a day went by without her checking in and touching base with someone in her family or one of her friends. By 2019, Ally was living with her childhood friend, Jenny. They had been close since they were 13 years old. Although she enjoyed spending time with Jenny and Jenny's young daughter, Ally had goals of her own. Her dream was to move into a place of her own and really build the life she wanted. I think that's so relatable for many of us, the longing for personal space, especially when you're growing up in a bustling household with a number of siblings. So, no doubt, Ally would have felt like she wanted that time for some peace and quiet on her own terms. I did take note that both of them really enjoyed getting dressed up, and you can tell they were very talented when it came to makeup skills. By March of 2019, Ally was one step closer to her goal. She landed a job at a popular deli nearby called Local Substation number 9. It was only about 10 minutes away from Jenny's place, which was great because Ally did not have a vehicle. She did not drive yet, so she had to rely on friends and family to give her a lift whenever she needed one. Now, Local 9 wasn't just a job for Ally. She wasn't there just to make ends meet. She wanted to achieve things for her future. So she was very diligent. She intended on starting behind the counter and then moving her way up over time. She was dedicated to all of her responsibilities. But more than that, Ally was dedicated to people. She stood out. She had these big blue eyes, her makeup, the way she carried herself, and of course, how helpful and pleasant she was. Not only was she a fixture at the local substation for all the customers who came in, but she also made friends with her co-workers. She was always there to help. One thing Ally was known for was making sure everyone in need was protected and taken care of. There was a time when a fellow co-worker had nowhere to sleep one night. She was going to have to spend the night out on the street. But Ally would not let that happen. She gave her a place to stay. She said if it wasn't for Ally, something really bad could have happened to her that night. Another co-worker was suffering from a panic attack, and Ally jumped into action. She rushed her into the bathroom, which was one of the only private areas in the deli, and she held her as she cried. She said Ally always had kind words for everyone. Her hard work was recognized by her boss as well, 51-year-old Georgios, who owned the deli along with his wife. Ally ended up taking over a lot of the management duties alongside the official manager, 34-year-old James Duffy, who everyone called Jimmy. Ally also considered Jimmy a very good friend, along with his girlfriend Kristen, who also worked at Local 9. For more than 6 months, Ally worked hard at this deli. She was trying to save enough money to move out on her own. She was dedicated and motivated and on a clear path toward her goals. That fall, she also made it official with a new boyfriend, William Dimming. They made it Facebook official on October 4th, 2019, so things were really coming together for Ally. But unfortunately, this is where the positive part of the story comes to an end. Things took a turn for the worst when just 2 days before Halloween, on Tuesday, October 29th, 2019, a call came into the Gloversville Police Department around 10 p.m. Officer Chad Simonson answered the phone that night. It was one of Ally's older sisters. She said she hadn't heard from Ally since the day before, on Monday, and members of the Lamont family were growing increasingly concerned because none of them could get a hold of Ally. That was very out of character for her, not to be in contact with them regularly. In a Facebook post from Ally's older sister Carly earlier that day, she explained, "If I don't get a confirmation that anyone has seen or heard from Elizabeth, I will be filing a missing persons report. Any information on her whereabouts and safety, please PM me." It's clear that no one reached out that night with information on Ally's whereabouts, and that is what led to this call. The first thing Officer Simonson did was look to see if any reports had come in that day involving Ally's name or description. There was nothing on record, but there was something, a gut feeling. From the minute he answered Ally's sister's call, he just felt like something wasn't right, and that's different from what we're used to hearing. This was a rookie cop, but maybe that meant he didn't have a jaded perspective that a lot of veteran cops had when they just assume, you know what? It's an adult. They ran away. No need to worry. But no, something about this did not sit right with him. That night, Simonson gathered as much information from Ally's sister as he could about Ally, including her last known address on record, which was at 71 Division Street, Apartment 1. It's late, but Simonson heads out anyway. It's only a 3-minute drive from the police station. Here is Division Street, and you can see some of those rundown homes I mentioned. But when Officer Simonson arrived, he realized this was most likely Ally's last address before she moved, because the apartment was vacant. By this time, Ally's sisters had actually gotten in touch with Jenny, her friend. When Simonson returned to the station around 11 p.m., he received a phone call from her. She was also concerned because she had not heard from Ally since the previous day. After speaking with Simonson, Jenny decides that she wants to go ahead and file that missing persons report. And even though it's late, once again, Simonson proceeds to drive over to Jenny's. The two of them sit down to talk about the last time Jenny saw her best friend. The previous afternoon of October 28th, Ally was at work at Local 9. Jenny got a text from her around 4:29 p.m. Mally texted Jenny and said, "Can you bring me my phone charger?" Jenny responded with, "Sure, be there soon." But a minute later, at 4:30, Ally said, "Thanks so much." Then, Jenny told Officer Simonson that she drove over to the deli and dropped off the charger. That was actually the last time she saw her. And since Jenny usually gave Ally a ride to and from work, Jenny texted her around 6:26 and asked, "When will you be getting off work?" But to her surprise, she didn't hear back from Ally. Knowing her usual schedule and that Local 9 closes at 8 p.m., Jenny texted her again at 7:55 and asked, "Will you be out at 8? Still nothing. No response, no call, no text, nothing. And that was odd. How was Ally going to get home that night? Well, she didn't get home that night, which really worried Jenny. So, by the next morning, when there was still no word, Jenny actually drove over to Ally's work to see if anyone knew where she was or where she went after her shift was over. Did someone else pick her up? Jenny ends up speaking to Jimmy, the manager who was on duty, and he said he had seen Ally but she was not scheduled that day, which made it even more peculiar and mysterious. Because if she wasn't working and she wasn't home, then where was she? She wasn't with her parents or her siblings, so where could she possibly be? Jenny told Simonson that Ally maintained a very close group of friends and family members, and she was regularly in contact with them. So if none of them had heard from her, that's a huge red flag. The next logical person to check in with was Ally's boyfriend, William. It was late, but that didn't matter to Simonson. He drove out there, but William was nowhere to be found. However, William's brother answered the door and explained to the officer that William was actually out searching for Ally. This situation was getting more and more concerning. It seemed like no one in Ally's close-knit circle of friends and family knew where she was. They began to realize the gravity of the situation. Simonson decided he was going to go ahead and issue a BOLO to every law enforcement agency statewide. In case you're not familiar, the term BOLO just stands for Be on the Lookout. I'm sure you've heard it before, but I like to explain these things sometimes. So now law enforcement agencies would be actively searching for an individual who is wanted or missing, and they'd keep an eye out. It also signifies a higher level of urgency. I have to say, I'm pretty impressed by the quick response and dedication that Simonson had to this situation, especially in a small town. Gloversville was a place where everyone seemed to know everyone, and the sudden disappearance of one of their own definitely started to raise the alarm, especially a vibrant, young, 22-year-old woman who had seemingly vanished into thin air. By the morning of October 30th, Simonson's night shift was over, and there were still no reports of Ally being spotted. So, Simonson had to relay all of Ally's information to his shift sergeant that morning, and he too thought they needed to look into this as soon as possible. Once apprised of the details, 2 detectives were assigned to the case, Detective Jillian Favell and Detective Sergeant Lucas Nellis. It's actually pretty uncommon for them to get a missing persons report regarding an adult. They usually deal with teenagers who turn up as runaways. So the detectives began their investigation by going back to basics and revisiting Jenny Young, Ally's friend and roommate. They wanted to know if there was anything unusual going on with Ally, especially the last time Jenny saw her. But she said, no, not at all. Ally's demeanor when she dropped off the phone charger was normal. They actually had plans to go trick-or-treating with Jenny and her daughter on Halloween, and Ally was her usual self. She was laughing and joking around, and there was nothing that stood out as being off. Then, the detectives inquired if Ally had any issues with anyone, or if she was going through anything in her life that would make her want to leave town. Jenny replied, no, not at all. She did recently start dating a guy named William, and things were going well with them as far as she knew, so that's what she told the detectives. She also said Ally was in a good mood and seemed genuinely happy about their upcoming Halloween plans. But not too long after this, the detectives got some information from inside the police department. They had run Ally's name, and they discovered that there had been an incident, a domestic incident with an ex-boyfriend named Tyler. Understandably, this raised some red flags. They jumped on this lead immediately. Could Tyler have found out that Ally had a new boyfriend and decided to harm her? Was this a case of, if I can't have her, no one can? They went to his last known address to pay him a little unannounced visit, but he was nowhere to be found. So, although they were having some issues tracking down Ally's ex-boyfriend, Tyler, in the meantime, the detectives decided to try William once again, her current boyfriend. They did end up making contact with him. According to him, their relationship was very positive and healthy, and he was really forthcoming about the last time he talked to his girlfriend, as well as his whereabouts at the time of her disappearance. William said they had been texting back and forth on October 28th when she was working her shift at Local 9. The last text, he showed them his phone, came in at 6:39 p.m., and it was just small talk. The weird thing is, William told investigators that he and Ally would text or message on Facebook all day, every day, when they weren't together, even if she was at work. They even did video chats while she was on her shift. But that evening, while in the middle of messaging over Facebook, all of a sudden her responses stopped. She wasn't answering, and William tried texting her and calling her. He did not stop all night, even after she should have been off work. At that point, he noticed his messages were not going through at all. He also told the detectives that Ally usually came over to his place after work most days, but he didn't hear from her that night. They were supposed to get together the following day, on Tuesday, to carve pumpkins with William's son. He did not know what happened to her, so he ended up going to meet with some friends that night. And where did they go? They went to the cemetery. Why? Well, they went there, according to William, to have some beers. Now that's an interesting setting, but it was close to Halloween, so I guess it could be fitting. William tells detectives that, when they were done, he crashed at a friend's house. He was worried about Ally all night, and he could not sleep. When he didn't get in contact with her the next day, he went out looking. He spent hours in the woods and looking on the roadsides. He even met up with Jenny, and they both were searching. Neither one of them had stopped calling her since their last text. That's when William finally reached out to Ally's sister, Llewellyn, on the night of the 29th, and explained that no one had spoken to Ally since the evening before. He was now going on the second day, and she was nowhere to be found. When Llewellyn checked around with friends and family, she confirmed no one had seen her. That's when that call to the police went out. Aside from the chilling setting where William and his friends went to grab a cold one, nothing seemed amiss with the way he recounted what happened up until this point. William's concern for Ally was regarded as completely genuine. But as you probably know, no one is going to be completely ruled out as having nothing to do with her disappearance until she's found alive, or they rule them out as suspects. So they still want to keep an eye on William. We know all too well that partners, statistically, are one of the most likely people responsible for causing harm to those close to them. That's very sad, but true. During this time, Ally's friends and her family members were taking matters into their own hands. They were reaching out to people and trying to spread the word with the help of social media. They were getting the attention of news stations, who were tweeting out Ally's picture and asking if anyone had seen her. They had also been posting missing persons posters everywhere. The community's concern was evident in the effort they were putting out there, which was a testament to the impact Ally had on everyone's life. They were out there searching, handing out flyers, and asking around. They were actually doing their own investigation. Of course, theories were being formed, but naturally, when it comes to true crime, many times it's the boyfriend or the ex-boyfriend, so all eyes were on Tyler and William. Here's an update that Llewellyn posted on October 30th after she talked with police. It said, "The police contacted me. My sister's cell phone pinged 4 miles away out in Hales Mills right before being shut off. That was the last location the police were able to find for her phone. I don't know how her supposed trip home after work and coming to Gloversville leads to her being 4 miles away. It was an answer, but not one any of us were hoping for or expecting. My anxiety is through the roof right now. I just want my little sister to be safe. This is a picture of my sister. We just want her home safely. We love you so much." End quote. She also tagged Ally's Facebook account. Now, I looked up Hales Mills, and here is where this is in reference to the local 9 deli. Apparently, this would have been entirely out of the way for Ally to be out there, 4 miles away, especially since we know she doesn't drive. It's an area with just a lot of land and nothing really out there, except for what appears to be cornfields. So why would Ally be all the way out there? After Llewellyn posted that her little sister was missing, and that her phone pinged out in Hales Mills, she got 286 comments on that post. There was one from a person named Matthew, who said he lived out on the 29 and wanted to know when Ally's phone died, because he could go out and look around in that area near him and ask anyone if they saw her. That was very nice of him. Llewellyn responded that it was around 7:40 p.m. on Monday night. That's important because it means her phone was turned off before her shift ended that night, not to mention it pinged before it was turned off. That would suggest, if this information is correct, that she left work at some point with someone. But what we know is her phone probably didn't just die because she got that charger from Jenny earlier that day. So, it's very odd. That same day, the detectives finally managed to reach Ally's ex-boyfriend, Tyler, who agreed to come in for questioning. His criminal history included disorderly conduct complaints and that domestic incident with Ally, which made him a person of interest right away. Tyler had a bad reputation, but he appeared to be very cooperative during questioning. In this interview, he told investigators that he and Ally had gotten into a domestic dispute, and it turned physical. He admitted that the incident resulted in her sustaining injuries, but he claimed that this was an isolated incident, that it was the first and last time anything like this happened during the course of their entire relationship. He went on to explain the background of this incident. In his words, he and Ally had been together for 4 years, and things took a turn one night when she showed up at his apartment unannounced about 2 months ago. She was fired up and seemed ready to get into an argument because she had heard he was cheating on her with one of her best friends. When he was asked how exactly Ally received these injuries, Tyler claimed that because she was being so combative, he had to restrain her. But isn't that what they always say? You know what? We weren't there, and Ally isn't here to defend herself and tell her side of the story, so we will never know exactly what happened. But his side of the story is that, after the heated blow-up, he blocked her number, he blocked all of her social media accounts, and he hadn't heard one single word from her since that night. He assured the police he had absolutely nothing to do with Ally's disappearance. However, given the history of violence between them, they were not ready to close this chapter yet. They still had their eye on Tyler, but his story did exonerate him a little bit. It made him look, I guess, less guilty. Even though these things did happen, there was nothing to actually hold him on, so he was free to go. The detectives decided to look a little deeper into Tyler and Ally's relationship. They cross-referenced statements with other accounts, and there didn't seem to be any recent communication with Ally. As it turns out, this is not the first time that Ally had gone missing. She had been known to run away when she was younger. In fact, there had been numerous missing persons reports filed about her when she was a teenager. But, on the other hand, they needed to acknowledge the fact that this disappearance was quite different. She was a responsible young woman, an adult, not a young girl. She held down a steady job, was in contact with her family all the time, and had never been missing for this long before. As the police were working hard to piece everything together, Ally's boyfriend, William, came into the police station with some upsetting news. He told them that Ally had been really depressed lately. He said that she even considered treatment and being hospitalized. She walked into St. Mary's Hospital to check herself in, but once there, she decided it wasn't an option for her because she didn't have access to health insurance. This was just a couple of weeks before this happened. William just couldn't get the thought out of his head that she might have caused harm to herself. The investigators couldn't rule it out completely. Ally's mental state could have played a pivotal role in why she just vanished. It wasn't clear why William would have held back, because he seemed to be so straightforward when they talked to him the first time. But it was most likely because he wanted to protect his girlfriend's privacy. As time went on, though, he knew he had to let them know. I saw a Facebook post on Ally's account from over a month before she went missing. It was from September 2nd. It said, "It's with a heavy heart I have to do this, but I'm looking for someone or a family to take in my two handsome, loving tuxedo cats. Their names are Gizmo and Frankenstein, 1 and 2 years old. Unfortunately, due to circumstances in my life, they're better off with a loving family who has the time they deserve. Frankenstein is neutered, Gizmo is not. I do not wish to separate the two. I would love for them to stay together. They are very close to each other. Gizmo loves his big brother. They come with food, litter, cat tree, collars, and very different bubbly personalities. Please help me find my babies' forever homes." End quote. There was definitely a lot going on in Ally's life if she felt like she had to give away her beloved pets. This gives us an idea of her state of mind a month before she disappeared, rehoming her two cats that she was so very attached to. Of course, this could be due to the fact that she was moving around a lot to different apartments and different friends' homes. With her work schedule now, maybe she just couldn't take care of them. But it could have also been because of what William said, that Ally was very depressed. Giving things away is another sign that someone may have plans to do something to themselves. These are just all clues to be taken into consideration, but from what Jenny relayed to the investigators, Ally was fine. She was happy, and she was looking forward to Halloween, so they definitely needed more information. The investigation into Ally Demon's disappearance had taken on even more urgency. Time was going by, and they just got dead end after dead end. The detectives were feeling the pressure. They wanted to find answers. The deli where Ally worked and was last seen became their central focus. Investigators figured that her co-workers, who had seen her on a regular basis for the last 6 months, might have even more context to provide. So they headed over to Local 9. Now keep in mind, the store doesn't open until 11 a.m., and the investigators were going over there before opening. When they got there, the door was locked. However, the lights were on. It looked like someone had been inside preparing for the morning shift, but there was just no one in sight. They checked the exterior and noted a handwritten sign taped to the window indicating that the store was undergoing renovations. But since it looked operational, the investigators didn't know when the sign was posted. It could be old. Sometimes people forget to take down a sign, or it could be new. Maybe they were starting renovations soon. Either way, they wanted to see if anyone had come in that day, so they walked around the building and spotted 2 people out by the dumpsters. Law enforcement had already made several attempts to call the store, hoping to speak to Ally's manager, but so far, all calls to the actual shop had gone unanswered. Both of the people out there by the dumpsters turned out to be employees of Local 9, including Kristen, who was the girlfriend of the manager, Jimmy. The investigators introduced themselves and asked Kristen when she last saw Ally. She explained she was not working on October 28th, but her boyfriend was. He was responsible for closing the store the evening that Ally disappeared. Kristen explained that Jimmy wasn't there right now. The owner barely came in, and Jimmy would be their main point of contact. She gave them his phone number and the number of the store owner, Georgios. The investigators made calls to both Jimmy and Georgios, but got no answer from either. With time continuing to pass, the detectives decided they needed help, so they called for assistance from the New York State Police. The state police sent in their Major Crimes Unit task force, led by investigator John Nigro and investigator Darren Jones. Going off the lead that Ally may have been depressed, they checked all the hospitals and mental health facilities, but they couldn't locate her. Now that the state police had joined forces with the local detectives, they went back to Local 9, hoping to get an interview with Jimmy, since it was now during business hours. To provide a little background. Here's how things actually operated at Local 9. Georgios was the owner, and he owned several diners. When it came to this sandwich shop where Ally worked, he had opened it in 2018 and relied heavily on Jimmy Duffy to manage the day-to-day operations. The other employees were Ally, Kristen, Jimmy's girlfriend, and another girl named Nicole. That was it. When the investigators arrived, Jimmy was there to greet them. The investigative team introduced themselves and asked to speak to Jimmy and Georgios, who had come in that day to meet with them and discuss the last time Ally had been on shift. Both Jimmy and his boss explained that the last time anyone had seen Ally was on Monday, October 28th. Georgios told investigators that, as a father himself, he thought of Ally like one of his own daughters and had been increasingly concerned for her well-being. She had recently confided in him that she was dealing with depression and had thoughts of ending her life. He could tell she was under a lot of pressure, and what didn't help was that the last night he saw her at the shop, there had been a mishap. The soda machines had leaked all over the floor. Ally did a lot for Local 9. She took on numerous managerial duties when Jimmy was unable to. Georgios could tell that Ally had become very frustrated. Her shift was coming to an end that night, so he told her, "Listen, instead of you having to stay here and deal with this mess that we made, you can go. Go home, relax, and take the rest of the night off." He also gave her a loan of $500, a cash advance, because he knew she was trying to get her own apartment. She had asked him for this loan, as she was desperately trying to get her own place. Georgios had her sign a handwritten note that night, with the amount she was supposed to pay him back. He hadn't heard from her since. So, he handed over this note that Ally had signed, acknowledging that she would pay him back in increments of $50 until the $500 was paid in full. Georgios said that he wanted to help Ally because he felt very protective over her. When the detective said, "Can we look around?" Georgio was like, "Yes." He invited them in. They could do a walkthrough of the entire property, and whatever they needed, he was there to help. So that's what they did. Now, this place was not exactly the most, I would say, organized establishment. It was somewhat of a chaotic scene. It did indeed look like it was under construction. There were walls being torn down in the middle of the building, floors that needed to be scrubbed and were in the middle of being cleaned, and what looked like a major soda leak. There was soda syrup all over the tile floors. It was just a mess. Now, this didn't really raise any suspicion, but it did catch their attention because they had to take everything into consideration. The place was messy. Here's a picture of the back area. You can tell there's a portion of the vinyl flooring that's actually coming up in one spot. There's a mop bucket on the counter that doesn't really look sanitary, especially since it's close to the condiments. And there's a bunch of trash in the middle of the hallway that leads to the back door where the dumpsters were. There were a couple of employees in the middle of cleaning when the investigators came through. Jimmy kind of acknowledged that this was the normal course of business for them. Here's what another area looked like. It looks like it could use some work. There are wall panels missing, plumbing that appears to be undone or never completed, and the wash area contains some of those wall panels, as well as more trash on the counter. Another view of that wall missing panels, and it looks like they're fixing that area. Here are what look like the new wall panels with the packaging still on. Even though the back looks like a mess and overall it could even be a potential health hazard, nothing was really that out of place. The front looked fine. Sometimes that's the way establishments are. The front is fine. This is more like business in the front, a mess in the back. But as long as no one can see through that facade in the front, where everything is nice and neat. "May I take your order?" Everything's organized. I guess it really doesn't matter to them. It didn't look like anything more than a very poorly managed restaurant that probably needs more employees. And speaking of which, Georgio does let them know about every person that works there, which I already mentioned, and he has one new employee. He had to hire them just a couple of days ago, and their name was Ally. Clearly, he needs the help, and you'll know one reason why. Jimmy. Jimmy had been with Georgio for a long time, And maybe he saw him as a son because, remember, he sees Allie like a daughter. Jimmy had worked at other businesses that Giorgio ran, and he had him come manage and open the Local 9. But Jimmy was more interested in drinking than working, and that's why this place probably looked like this. Allie took on so many responsibilities, as a matter of fact, because Jimmy was not reliable. He was definitely intoxicated that morning, and it was only 11 a.m. So, investigators had many more questions for Jimmy and Giorgio, and they wanted to get them on the record. They asked them to come down to the station and both make formal statements. Once there, they were put in 2 separate rooms, and that's when it became even more obvious that Jimmy was heavily intoxicated. It was very hard to get him to focus on anything. He was all over the place, standing up, sitting down, slurring his words, even yelling at the investigators to find his friend, saying, "Find my friend, find my coworker," calling Allie his best employee. We get to see a clear picture of Jimmy right here. This will just give you an idea of what he looks like and what his demeanor is like. "I'm an alcoholic and I'm a drug addict. Do not tell my boss," he said. He admits he's an alcoholic and a drug addict and doesn't want his boss to know. He appeared genuinely interested in assisting the investigators in finding his friend Allie, but because of his demeanor, it was really hard to have a conversation with him. And this is a serious matter. I'm pretty sure it's obvious that Jimmy is an alcoholic, but remember, Giorgio isn't always in the shop. By the later part of the interview, Jimmy was upset. He stood up, yelling at the investigators to find Allie, saying he wanted to get his life back to normal. And yes, I'm sure these types of interviews can be very stressful. "Listen, I want you to find my friend. I want to get back to work and I want my life back to normal," he said. Now, they move on to the boss. They've gotten enough from Jimmy, and Giorgio explains the last time he saw Allie. He tells them it was Monday, October 28th. The soda machines needed changing, so he went there to assist Jimmy. They had been out of order for a while, and they needed to be fixed as soon as possible. There's actually a sign right here, and it indicates that the soda machines were not in service. They couldn't afford not to be selling drinks, so Allie was up front taking orders. Well, one of the men working on the soda machines accidentally cut one of the hoses that led to the soda syrup. And I don't know if you've ever worked in a restaurant, but this is bad. These types of soda machines, if you are not aware, combine this concentrated, sticky, thick syrup with carbonated soda water, and that's how it comes out of the machine. Not only do you have to get the mixture right, but you also have to handle these hoses with care. Well, they didn't, so the syrup began to spill all over the place at a rapid speed. And of course, Allie, being who she is, came over to help. It was a big job, and she was a little frustrated. She was doing everything, and she's always doing everything. She did not want to deal with it, which is understandable. I already explained that Giorgio made the decision to let Allie leave early. He saw she was under a lot of pressure. He gave her the loan that she needed, and that was the last time he saw her. When investigators asked for an approximate time they thought she left, it was between 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock that night. So, there you have it. Both Jimmy and Giorgio saw Allie the same day that everyone else last spoke to her. She was helping with the syrup situation. She complained she didn't want to do it, and she left. "Around what time do you think, if you were to guess?" they asked. Giorgio responded, "So she took the $500 that night, and what time did she leave?" "I would have to say anywhere between 7 to 8 o'clock. She said, 'Thank you, Giorgio.' I said, 'Just be good,' I yelled. 'Just be good,' and then she left." During the interview with detectives, Giorgio again mentioned Allie's well-being, and you could tell that he definitely put off that dad vibe. He said he even tried to help guide Allie. He was aware that she had a troubled past. It was a violent relationship with her ex-boyfriend, and he wanted her to take care of herself. But she was a troubled girl, he said. It was rough. I tried to help her. I tried to be a father to her. Her boyfriend was beating her up. I felt bad for her. I treated her literally as a daughter of mine. He tried to be there to help her. He also thought she might have been thinking of taking her own life on one occasion. Giorgio said that Allie confided in him, saying she didn't want to be there anymore. Initially, he thought she was referring to work, but it became apparent as she continued to express herself that she meant she didn't want to live at all. Then, one day, she says to me, "I don't want to be here. I've had enough of this." I said, "You mean you don't want to work anymore?" "I've had enough of my life," she said. But detectives have to look down every avenue, so they asked Giorgio if he thought Jimmy could have anything to do with Allie's disappearance. Remember, Jimmy was also there that night. Giorgio responded, "No, that's not possible because Jimmy does not have the guts to do anything like that. He also doesn't have any reason to harm Allie because they're close friends. The one thing we never talked to you about is, do you think Jim has anything to do with this?" the detectives asked. "Between us," Giorgio replied, "I really don't think so. He doesn't have the gall to do anything that would harm her or do anything to her, anything like that. They were friends. They were buddies." The one thing investigators wanted to know at this point was if he had made any phone calls to Allie or if there were any calls or texts between him and Jimmy. They just wanted to know what he'd been up to in the last few days. Were there any texts between Jimmy and him after Allie's disappearance? They wanted to be sure that Giorgio, who seemed to play a fatherly role in his employees' lives, wasn't hiding anything for Jimmy or covering for him in any way. After all, Giorgio said Jimmy was a good worker, but he also had a bad side. Initially, Giorgio was hesitant. He didn't really want to share things he referred to as private information, which only raised more questions. What was hidden in that communication history that he didn't want the investigators to find out about? The way I understood it was that he and Jimmy had a habit of texting about women. Giorgio is married and Jimmy has a girlfriend, so Giorgio said that those conversations were none of the investigators' business, and that's understandable. But the investigators were like, "We don't care about that." However, Giorgio made it clear that he did care, and he felt like it was an invasion of his privacy. "So keep going down, keep going," the investigator prompted. "Then there are a couple of calls. James, right there. This one's 36 minutes long." Giorgio replied, "You're the one with the information right now that can help us solve this." "I'm not denying you the information," Giorgio responded. "What I'm denying you is a lot of private, personal information." Here's the thing. These interviews are recorded, and most people know that. And this is a serious matter, so it wouldn't be uncommon for someone to think, "You know what? All this could potentially make it into the public." That would be scary if you were having some unsavory conversations in regard to other women when you have a wife. You know, if he was cheating, that might cause his life to be in an uproar when he's not even involved. So he hesitated to show them anything on his phone. But eventually, Giorgio did let them look through his phone, holding on to it so he had a bit of control over the situation. Honestly, he didn't have to show them anything. He wasn't under arrest or being detained, and he was willingly giving them information. When the investigators were looking through his call log, they pointed to a 36-minute phone call and wanted to know more about it. "Is Giorgio hiding something?" they asked. Giorgio responded, "No, I'm not. I'm not even covering for Jimmy." Instead, he said, "I have to actually think about it. I don't remember what the call was about. We talk all the time." He added, "You know, what if it's about women? Let's say I don't want to divulge it. Maybe he had something to do with it, and you just don't want to come forward. What's the conversation you had with Jimmy that day?" they pressed. Giorgio replied, "I want to remember it first, because if it revolves around women, I don't want to play it." The investigator replied, "We don't care about that." "Well, I do," Giorgio insisted. "So you're not letting us listen?" The investigator asked. "That's the way I'm taking it right now," Giorgio replied. Eventually, the interview wrapped up. Giorgio and Jimmy were free to go. That same day on Facebook, there was some very interesting chatter, with lots of conversations related to what had transpired. Llewellyn posted an update letting everyone know. New York State Police took over the investigation. Conveniently, her video at work wasn't working that night. "This is much bigger than anyone could imagine. My heart hurts so bad not knowing if my sister is alive, safe, okay somewhere. We are a wreck." This post got 40 comments, and one in particular stood out, so I opened the thread. Someone named Danny said, "I'd be checking out her boyfriend. How could he not know where she is?" That's a reasonable question. Well, William himself answered, and I gained a lot of insight in these next few posts. William replied, "You realize I'm the one who let Llewellyn know I hadn't heard from Ally since Monday night and asked her if she had seen or heard from her? That is how we got to this point in the first place. She was talking to me on Facebook, and then she just stopped, and my messages wouldn't go through. Now 2 days have gone by. I spent hours today looking through woods and roadsides and Hales Mills with Ally's roommate, our close friend, and talking with the police all day, constantly calling. This isn't normal, and I was concerned, but I'm sorry. I don't know where she is. She never came home or texted me. That's the whole point. SMH." No one was expecting that response. Danny tagged William and replied, "I didn't know that. I'm sorry. I just heard you posted a photo with her recently. Damn, I hope she's okay and found soon. If the cameras magically stopped working, I'd check into who owns the place she works and question them." Right. So I don't know if you caught that in Llewellyn's post. Apparently the cameras at Local 9 were not working the night Ally was there. That place doesn't look high-tech or well put together, so I wouldn't be surprised. But let's continue reading because these are people who know Ally. William responded again to Danny, and I believe he was referring to the investigators. "I don't know what they're doing at this point. They told me they can't give out any more info right now, but they were searching houses last I knew, friends of hers and whatnot." That was true. They were making their rounds at friends' houses, and I'll get to that in a moment. William went on to say that he doesn't know what to think at this point. "I haven't slept since Monday night." Danny inquired about Ally's phone, asking if it had been on at all. William replied, "Nope, not once since 7:30 to 7:40 p. Monday night." Danny just replied, "Shh, something's not right. Was she upset? Were you two fighting at all to make her want to get away?" "I don't know. I don't think she'd put her family through all this. I just have a terrible feeling." William assured the group, "No, we don't fight. We never fought. I talk to her all day, every day. She always checks in with me to see how my day is going. We're literally always in contact, and she spends most of her time with either me or her roommate, Jenny." So it made no sense to him. He goes on to explain that on Tuesday, she was supposed to come over on her day off and do stuff for Halloween, carve pumpkins and hang out with him and his son. She didn't even go get her paycheck that day. Interesting. Well, we know that Ally was supposedly given that $500 in cash, so maybe grabbing her paycheck wasn't a priority. However, you'd think that if she was gathering money for a deposit on an apartment, she would want every single cent she could get her hands on. So, it does seem a bit odd. Later that night, Danny asked William for an update, and all he mentioned was that the Local 9 had been closed that day. But that could have been due to the fact that Jimmy and Georgios were both at the police station, and the investigators were searching the shop. By that night, Llewellyn had a final update. She says, quote, "Thank you to everyone for your support right now. We appreciate it. We appreciate you. Please keep sharing in hopes that something comes up, and I will try to get back to everyone in the morning. I've been talking to police and people all day long trying to find leads on her whereabouts. I've slept for about 2 hours in the last 48. I'm exhausted mentally and physically. I love you so much." And she tags Ally. "I pray you're somewhere safe. We will find you. I promise we will. Until we know where my sister is, our hearts will continue to hurt. Our minds will be in a daze." And that was the end of her post. I feel for her, for Ally's family, and for her loved ones, and I commend them on all of their efforts. I see this more and more, where families are even conducting their own investigations, and I think it's a smart thing to do. But the next day is Halloween, and that morning, Len is back on Facebook giving another update. She tells them that they went to the deli where Ally works, and they were closed and under construction. She went around and asked other businesses in the area, and no one had anything good to say about the owner or the manager, Jimmy, and how they treated their employees. Yikes, that's not good. I'm not sure what updates they were getting from the police, but at this point, by the sound of William's last post, it seems like the family and friends were in the dark and were out there looking for themselves, including going out to Ally's work. The comments were interesting. First of all, of course, people are questioning a lot of things. That's what we do. We don't have the answers, so we're going to keep questioning things. Leland assures everyone that the police have been working hard since the minute they found out that Ally went missing, and that they are doing their jobs the best they can. One poster named Stacy said, "How is it magically closed and under construction, but she worked on Monday? Something's not right here." In response, Jennifer says, "Most businesses would post ahead of time that they're going to be closed, or there should be a permit if they're really doing construction." Sure, but we saw what they considered under construction, and I'm not sure it really qualifies. Stacy responded, saying, "Yeah, but it's weird. She disappeared on Monday, and then Tuesday they're doing construction, and the cameras didn't work during the time she went missing." Someone named Nicole was writing about how the dumpsters out in the back had been blocked off with tape, and there was a cop sitting right next to them. Stacy responds back that she had been out there in the area, and there were 3 white SUVs across the street and 2 SUVs in the back with their hatches open and people standing there. Wow, I would definitely be curious to know what investigators were doing. This photo might have been taken a little later, but it does look like there are some cop cars parked in front of the dumpsters. The media released this picture of a cop car, some police line, "Do not cross" tape, and it's sort of blocking off the local 9. That's probably why it was closed when Ally's family went there to investigate. Darlene, a former co-worker of Ally's, posted on Facebook. She wants to know, why are they under construction? There's nothing in that place that needs to be under construction, and it's really small. How convenient. But she says she's not surprised because no one had anything good to say about Jimmy or Georgios. Jimmy and Georgios always had something bad to say about others as well. She just hopes and prays that Ally is safe. I can feel the frustration in these posts. You've got bad bosses, a weird workplace, a missing girl, and tensions rising. One poster named John agreed that it was really weird to be under construction the very next day with no prior notice. He remarked that the owner should just hang a sign on the front door that says, "Hiding evidence, closed permanently." Well, we know that the investigators have been in there. They've searched it before, and they didn't see anything out of the ordinary. But of course I'd think without any other news that this was all very odd. One person flat out said, "I think the boss has something to do with it." They also asked if there were cameras at any of the other places nearby, and if they could see anything. Len assures them that the police are already on top of all of that. She said, "Anything we're thinking of, the police are already one step ahead." And that's good. That's more than I can say in a lot of these cases, and I think you know what I mean. I'm only going to read a few more because the police have a lot going on and I want to get to that. But from the outside looking in, the public has a lot to say. One poster named Shane said, "So did I read this right? Cameras were not working one night, but work every other night? It seems legitimately sketchy." Someone named Taylor said that they actually worked there for months, and anytime they would do anything wrong, Georgios would call the shop because he was watching the cameras like a hawk. He even made sure that the connection was always good, so Taylor didn't think this was a coincidence. And that is very interesting. It does sound sketchy, doesn't it? To add to all of this, the online sleuths pull up a review of Local 9 that was posted the day after Ally went missing. This was from an experience a customer had on October 29th, and I want to read it to you because it is very interesting. We don't always get to see this. Julie explained in the review, "My friend and I stopped in for lunch today, and we were not greeted when we entered. As a matter of fact, I didn't see anyone for a while. There were a couple of customers waiting for orders, and it was apparent they weren't happy. A young man approached the counter to take her order, and it was very obvious he was under the influence of something. As he took the order, he almost passed out. The other gentleman that was preparing food was very busy, but the man who took our order was just standing around. There's no seating because they're under construction at the moment, so we went outside to wait in the car. The customer that was waiting when we arrived came out with a sandwich, and after looking at it, he went back inside with the wrapper open. It was obvious something was wrong." That was the end of the review. It does seem like they were in over their heads, which is why Georgios had to hire someone. But are they just bad bosses, or are they bad people? To get a little more insight on that, another former employee, Cindy, said that she worked at another establishment called Travers, which was one that Georgios owned as well. She knew Jimmy and said that there wasn't anything good to say about him. He was just a sub-maker. He's not someone you can trust. And Georgios, well, he just decided to leave Travers behind and open up this new place. And who did he decide to take with him? Jimmy, to help get everything ready to open. And when it did open, she said they lost all their jobs. The one person who didn't lose their job was Jimmy, for some reason. So it really does seem like everyone's pointing the finger and has their eyes on Georgios and Jimmy, even the investigators. They didn't get much out of Jimmy when he was inebriated during his initial interview, so they decided to show up really early at his house that day, October 31st. He was sober. So they once again asked him to come down to the station to give a formal statement. It was around 10 o'clock in the morning at this point, and this time Jimmy was so much better. He was so easy to talk to. They had a conversation, and after 2 hours, investigators really weren't getting much that they didn't already know. Jimmy said he wanted them to find Ally. He said, "She's a great worker and a friend. I want you to find her." "Okay, trust me, I do. Because I want my friend back. Not only was she my friend, she was a hell of a worker that I can never replace." In the third hour, investigators started to feel like, you know what? We could be on the verge of a revelation in this case. They think there might be something that Jimmy wants to get off his chest. Or at least, they want him to think that they think that. So, the investigators are playing the game they always do, giving Jimmy a way out, saying things like, "Maybe there was an accident and you witnessed it. Maybe you don't want to get anyone in trouble, but you feel like coming clean because you feel bad about what you saw. Is Georgios covering for himself?" These were the things they were asking him. And Jimmy didn't answer. If he did, all he would say was, "I don't know. I feel like you're holding back. I tell you this much. I don't know where she is. She was fine when I saw her leave. You know what I mean? I don't know." After hours of questioning, it looked like Jimmy was desperate to unburden himself of something, but he just kept holding back. The more they questioned him, the more they saw him kind of come forward and then push back a little bit. It was clear that he was holding a significant piece of the puzzle in Ally's disappearance. There was just something standing in his way of letting it out. Meanwhile, that day, back on Facebook, Len posted this picture of her and Ally on Halloween in the past. They're dressed up like cheetahs, and she writes, "I love you so much. This is an old picture, but one of my favorites. I pray that you're safe and warm somewhere. I pray that you're in no harm or haven't been." That was the end of her quote. But later that night, Len posted again, and it wasn't what anyone was expecting. It was shocking. Late that Halloween night, she revealed everyone's worst nightmare had come true, writing, "Well, since the news already released it, the search is off for my beautiful, amazing young sister. They found her dead, and the state investigators told us before it reached the news. We are not okay, not at all. Please just say in your prayers because we are beyond lost and have no words right now." Wow, I can't even begin to imagine how hard that was for her to write, let alone getting that news, that Ally's no longer with us. The fact that it was already breaking news, and the family hadn't even had time to process it yet. There wasn't much information about how she died, or where or how she was discovered. It did, however, say that more information was expected to be released at a Friday morning press conference the next day at Troop G headquarters. Well, why couldn't they wait? Well, because you know how news is. It turns out that earlier that day, investigators had information that led them to a wooded area east of an on-ramp to Interstate 87 at the southbound entrance near Exit 13 in a town called Malta, which is about a 45-minute drive from Gloversville. They were initially checking this area for any evidence of Ally's whereabouts, looking in the swampy marshland off the highway. They used drones and canines, and ultimately, they uncovered the unclothed, muddy remains of a female. She was 25 feet into the woods, in between the ramp and the highway. This is the actual burial site, a very wet and muddy area. The hole had been dug into the marshy ground, making more water come to the surface. Once the body was removed from the makeshift grave and transported to the medical examiner's office, it was determined to be that of 22-year-old Elizabeth Lamont. It was clear that she had sustained multiple blunt force injuries to her head, with multiple skull fractures, which ultimately caused damage to her brain and led to her death. Who had done this to her and why? Well, after getting surveillance video from a nearby business that showed the front parking lot and the front door to Local 9, it showed employees leaving the store as early as 6 p.m. Georgios is seen giving one of those employees a ride, then coming back to Local 9 with Jimmy waiting outside the front door for him. This is around 6:12 p.m. Mally is never seen leaving, and oddly Jimmy is seen on camera getting into Georgios's black 2008 VW Pat wagon. They proceed to drive to the back of this building, out of sight of the cameras. Suspicious, right? The Pat isn't seen leaving this area again until about 8 p.m. Then coming back sometime later around 8:45, going straight to the back of the building once again out of sight, before leaving for a final time later that night. Ally is still never seen coming out of that store. It was suspected that this was because she was in the back of Georgios's Pat, and not by her own will. Of course, although I'm sure Georgios could argue that he was waiting for Ally and Jimmy to get done that night, so he could graciously give them rides home, like he'd done with the other employee. But remember, he and Jimmy already told police they both saw Ally leave early that night, between 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock, after the soda machine broke, and Georgios loaned her some money. But that's not caught on camera. So how did she leave? Did she go through the back somehow? This is where the sub shop used to be. This is the front door, and this business across the street has a clear view from cameras. However, from the front, when you drive around the building to where the dumpsters are, as well as the back doors, this isn't in the sight of any cameras. Why would Ally come out of the back door? It just didn't seem right. Plus, she would have called Jenny or William to get a ride, which never happened. She just abruptly stopped messaging William around 6:39 p.m., which is after Jimmy and Georgios were seen driving to the backside of the building together. It was time to put the pressure on Jimmy. They didn't want to say too much because they wanted to give him the opportunity to tell them what he knew or what he was hiding. They kept urging him to tell his secret, to tell them what he knew. Maybe he witnessed something and he's trying to cover for his boss. They just kept pressing. Something went too far that night in trying to figure it out. You have the answer to the puzzle here. I need to clear my mind, okay? And finally, Jimmy said that he was ready to tell them everything, but he asked for something. He wanted the DA to sign a document stating that if he told them what happened, they wouldn't hold him liable. They would let him walk away, get on a bus, and disappear. He wanted it signed by if everything you guys say is true, leave me alone. I walk out of here, you put me on a bus, and I can go. Well, the investigators were like, listen, we can't promise you anything because we haven't heard the details. It all depends on what he's about to tell us. Clearly, he said, if you tell us that she overdosed and you got scared and hid her body, that's one thing. But for example, this investigator said, if we go out there and find her cut into pieces, no, that's not going to fly. We're not going to be able to not hold you liable when something like that was done. But we know people can usually get a reduction in time served or a reduction in charges if you come clean. So Jimmy was ready to do so, and suddenly you see him. He's leaning over a garbage can in the interrogation room, opening up a pack of cigarettes, just holding one in his hand. Then, there was this deep, guttural laugh that came out of his throat. It was this evil laugh that the detective said made a chill run down his spine. And that's when Jimmy said, you don't even know. And it's scary. You don't even know. You really don't. Look at him, his face. You know what? It actually reminds me of, I'm wearing an R.L. Stine shirt. It reminds me of the R.L. Stine Goosebumps book, The Dummy. Do you remember that one? It's like a marionette doll. It's creepy. That's exactly what this man looks like. Pure evil. It's almost like he's reliving the moment that this happened in his mind. And the story he told was very disturbing. He said that Georgios offered him money to get rid of Ally. Yeah. And the investigators have no idea what the motive could be. and they don't know if Jimmy's even telling them the truth, but they keep listening. Jimmy said that, back on October 25th, he and Georgios met in his parked car behind Local 9, and during that meeting, they discussed getting rid of Ally. Georgios gave Jimmy $300 to take care of her. The plan was to kill her on Sunday, October 27th. Initially, Georgios had Jimmy doing this all by himself. Georgios said, "You know what? We could stage it as an accidental drug overdose or failed robbery." However, after thinking about this, Georgios was like, no. If a body's discovered inside of my business, it would tarnish the deli's reputation. So the pair conspired together. Jimmy would hit Ally with a baseball bat and conceal her body in a large sandwich preparation cooler. He would hide it and then eventually take it out and dispose of it. It's so disgusting. Yet the day before the planned murder, Jimmy had a change of heart. He told Georgios, "I cannot go through with it." Georgios was really angry, especially because he had already paid him to get the job done. Imagine all 300 being worth taking someone else's life. It's unbelievable. But Jimmy said he betrayed him because he was hesitating. He was questioning his manhood. Ultimately, Georgios came to the decision that he could no longer trust Jimmy to get this done alone. So they met up the following day, on Monday, October 28th, and drove a U-Haul truck to pick up a new oven for their store. During that drive, they discussed their new plan. According to Jimmy's confession, the initial plan was to get Ally high and strangle her. However, during that drive, they changed their minds. Instead, Georgios instructed Jimmy to hit Ally over the head with a metal baseball bat that Georgios kept in his car. Afterward, they planned to clean the shop and bury her body. But Jimmy told Georgios there was no way he could do this sober. He said, "I need money for drugs and alcohol." So Georgios gave Jimmy $500 more so that he could buy all the drugs he needed to get high enough to kill Ally that night. He even brought him a case of beer. According to Jimmy, Georgios let everyone else go home early and then told poor Ally to stay just a little longer to help them clean, do some dishes, and empty some soda syrup bags into the sink at the back of the store. She was just standing there, doing her job. Jimmy snuck up behind her. He had that aluminum baseball bat, and while her back was turned, he swung as hard as he could and hit her right in the back of the head. He said the sound was so terrible it sounded like branches breaking. Ally, of course, didn't see it coming at all. She was completely caught off guard. The plan had initially been that Jimmy was supposed to wait. He was supposed to put a big garbage bag, an industrial garbage bag, over Ally's head and then strike her. This was supposed to contain the blood, but that didn't go as planned. However, right after the first strike, Georgios had a bag ready, and he put it over Ally's head and started to suffocate her. But this woman fought so hard, harder than they imagined she would. She was kicking violently and trying to get free after the first blow. While Georgios was holding this bag over Ally's head, Jimmy hit her 3 more times in the skull. Despite her extensive injuries at this point, Ally continued to struggle for her life, even after being knocked to the ground with a bag over her head. Georgios was frustrated. He started to choke her, but she still wasn't dead. She was still moving. So he yelled to Jimmy, "Go get something heavier. She's not dying, she's not going down." She was still frantically kicking, and that's when Jimmy returned with a 2.5-pound sledgehammer. He took it and struck Ally in the head with all his might. Then Georgios took over, and he hit her too, over the head again and again with that hammer. Then this man proceeded to choke her until she stopped twitching. That's when Jimmy said he looked over at Georgios, and he had this expression of happiness on his face. Then he spoke something in a different language and checked Ally's pulse before saying, "It's over." After these two evil monsters determined that Ally was dead, they looked at the scene and realized there was way more blood than they had anticipated, and they were not prepared to clean up a mess like that. First, they had to remove her body, but before doing so, Georgios callously took the $500 that he lent to Ally out of her pocket, handed it over to Jimmy, along with Ally's cell phone, and said, "Good job. That is just gross." Jimmy claimed that he broke her phone while trying to unlock it and eventually just threw it away. He also explained that Georgios had already purchased items from Walmart earlier that day in preparation for the attack, including work gloves, pants, and a sweatshirt to wear, along with lawn fertilizer. He thought that this would expedite the natural decomposition process of Ally's body once they disposed of her. So they began wrapping her up in garbage bags that they had on hand and securing them in place with duct tape. When it came time to cover up their heinous crime, their genius plan was to cut the soda machine lines and flood the entire floor with the red soda syrup to conceal the blood. That way, they could buy some time. They would pretend that the back area was under construction, as they put it, and they could even have workers help them clean up without even knowing they were concealing a murder. Then they would concoct the heartfelt tale they told investigators about giving Ally an extra $500 and sending her home like true gentlemen because they cared so much about her. Remember, Georgios said she was like a daughter. Well, this plan backfired when they realized just how messy soda syrup really is. It was way too much for them to handle with the cleaning supplies they had, so they jumped inside Georgios's car and headed back over to Walmart together. There, they picked up plastic sheeting, duct tape, rags, soap, bleach, and when they returned, Jimmy said he saw Georgios wipe down the sledgehammer with a rag soaked in bleach and water. After they finally managed to clean up most of the mess and wash away their sins, or so they thought, they loaded up Georgios's Volkswagen with Ally's body, as well as bags and bags of items associated with this murder. Then they drove out of town to Malta. When they were driving, they threw the items out of the window in all different places, scattering evidence all over the place, before placing Ally's naked body in an undignified, makeshift, shallow grave filled with fertilizer and cement, before covering it with foliage. Well, when Jimmy was done telling the investigators all this, they thought it was quite a tale, but they weren't sure they believed it. To prove it was true, Jimmy told them where they could find the bat. He said he threw it into a pond out in the wetlands of Dean Long Road and Highway 81 on Roland Street in the town of Milton. This is where it is on the map. Here is the lake. So investigators drove out there with Jimmy, and it didn't take them long to retrieve the bat because Jimmy didn't realize that it would float. There it was on the surface in some brush along the edge of the pond. After this finding, the investigators were more open to believing what Jimmy said was true. As they were driving back toward the main road, though, Jimmy stopped them and pointed out an area in the woods along the same street where he said they dumped a bag of trash. Sure enough, about 20 feet off the road, they spot a black garbage bag sitting there right behind a tree with a brown tarp sticking out of it. When they opened the garbage bag, they found a roll of duct tape, an interior car mat, a rolled-up tarp, plastic with what appeared to be bloodstains, as well as a number of dirty plastic gloves, rags, miscellaneous garbage like Bud Light cans, and the packaging for the plastic sheet, the packaging for the garbage bags, and other items like a dirty mop. There were also a number of smaller black plastic bags with cleaning materials in them. It was just nasty looking at all that. Clearly, these were items used to clean up the mess inside the back of Local 9. Now it was time for Jimmy to lead them to where Ally's body was. He warned them that they were going to need tools, at least shovels and a sledgehammer, to break through the concrete they had poured on top of her. They sent a team to the ramp off Interstate 87 and located Ally's burial spot. I showed you this earlier. Jimmy explained that he was so heavily intoxicated at the time of disposing of Ally's body that Georgios had to incentivize him by throwing money at him so he would continue to dig her grave. It's amazing just how little value some people can place on human life and how ignorant they are to believe that they're not going to get caught, that they're not going to be seen on Walmart cameras, that they're not going to be seen on any cameras. Since 2019, investigators obtained that surveillance footage from that Walmart, which is only a 5-minute drive from Local 9. Sure enough, they catch Georgios alone on the camera buying Clorox wipes, duct tape, cleaning supplies, and 55-gallon garbage bags. But not only that, he was a little hungry, I guess, after all that work, and he picked up an Almond Joy candy bar and some laundry detergent, just like he was going about a normal day, not that he had killed someone. There was still a lot to learn, but investigators had enough to call him back to the station for one more interview, a more intense one this time. But as soon as they read him his rights, Georgios asked for a lawyer. There was still so much to the story that wasn't revealed yet. Most importantly, though, they had enough evidence to arrest both Georgios and his little dob boy, James Jimmy Duffy. Here's the press release that was done following the arrest. Major Robert Pennant spoke, and he talked about the investigation, the drones, and the canines that helped them find Ally's body. On November 1st, the day after Ally's family got the news that she was never coming back, her sister Llewellyn posted this to Facebook. I haven't said much. I had this constant ache in my throat and chest, the feeling my family and I are feeling, or feelings I never imagined one could feel. I'm hurt and angry. I'm sad and devastated. I love my sister. I miss her more than I could ever express to any of you. I cannot thank everyone enough for the love and support you're all showing my sister and family. It's a hard concept to grasp that I will never see, hug, smell, or hear from my sister ever again. My sister was brutally murdered. This is why I cannot accept what has happened, but I really just want to tell everyone, thank you. Your support means more than any of you know right now. And she's right. It would be very hard to grasp that someone close to you is just gone forever. No saying goodbye, nothing. On Monday, November 4th, a vigil was held for Ally at Myers Park. It was a very emotional event, but the colors and the candles at the park brought some brightness to this occasion, and bright pink were her favorite colors. People came out wearing purple shirts to honor Ally during the vigil. One of Ally's co-workers spoke up about the tragedy that had taken place. She expressed her disbelief at what had happened. It was unfathomable. The co-worker also talked about how dedicated Ally was to her job. She had given her all to that shop. The co-worker also condemned the actions of Georgios and Jimmy. She described their actions as horrendous and unforgivable. The first thought that crossed their mind when Ally went missing was that they needed to look into Georgios and Jimmy. This co-worker just had a gut feeling, and ultimately, this intuition proved to be correct. A Lamont family friend told the news that Ally's family was ripped apart. They would never be normal again and would have to live without Ally forever. The intensity of their pain was indescribable. One person who attended the vigil didn't even know Ally but wanted to pay their respects. They posted this to the event page. Quote, I close my eyes and I pray. I didn't know her, but I was there to support an innocent young girl who just went into work one day like a normal person and got hurt by her own bosses. When I saw on Facebook that a local girl went missing, I prayed like crazy. Sadly, by all the things I knew, the boss had something to do with it. My heart and soul hurt for her and her family and friends. Why on earth would someone do this to a hard-working, kind person? Sickening. Rest in peace, beautiful girl. I'm glad they caught these sick men. I'm sorry you went through this. I couldn't imagine how scared you were. Everyone lit candles, and they let balloons go in her honor. There were still so many unanswered questions, and people wanted answers. People knew these men were evil, but why Ally? What could she have ever done to deserve this? Well, they'd have to wait to get those answers. By November 27th, Llewellyn shared this picture of an urn with Ally's ashes inside. She wrote, This is what my family is left with. This hurts my heart so bad. I just sat here and cried for what feels like forever holding you, but I'm beyond thankful that you'll be home for Thanksgiving. I love you so, so much, Elizabeth and Lamont. This is all we have left of you, and I will cherish this forever and eternity. I will always have you with me and my necklace with you in it too. I feel better knowing you're home with us, just not the way you should be. Rest easy, my beautiful sister. I talk to you every day, and for the rest of my life I will continue to do so. How incredibly sad. The pain they have to endure, losing someone this way, and all they have is her ashes. By the time the preliminary hearing was set, both men had been appointed attorneys to represent them. More of the story was unfolding, and since Jimmy had confessed that he was paid to assist in the killing, he had to make a choice. Either take a plea deal, or place his fate in the hands of a jury at trial. Well, he didn't want to accept a plea. He wanted a manslaughter conviction instead of a murder conviction because he wanted to spend less time behind bars. However, the court said that they were not prepared to accept a plea of manslaughter without a 25-year determinate sentence, including life imprisonment. So Jimmy Duffy defiantly declared, "Okay, looks like we're gonna trial. I'll bring my popcorn." Those were his exact words. Once this case was presented to the grand jury, both Georgios and Jimmy were indicted for first-degree intentional homicide, including the aggravating factor of a contract killing, which elevated both of their charges to a potential life sentence without the possibility of parole. Jimmy agreed to testify against his former boss, and the prosecution built their case. Meanwhile, time was going by. Ally's family was trying to cope. Her little sister, Brooke, posted this picture of the two of them on Facebook on June 11th, 2020 and said, "Another day I wake up and you're not here, screaming, crying for you in my dreams. I desperately need your advice. Your laugh is embezzled in my brain. God, why did you have to take my best friend, my biggest supporter? I crave your hugs. I want to see you smile and tell me I love you so much. Man, half my heart is gone. I can't sleep because I picture you. Damn man, why did you take her? I will never understand. I'll never be okay, but if there's something I know, I've got to keep going for you, Ally. I promise you I'd never give up. I can't wait till the day I see you again. I can't even imagine how painful that is, and I bet it never goes away." Almost 18 months after their heinous crimes, on May 12, 2021, Georgios Kavos was tried in a Saratoga County courthouse. The trial lasted for 6 weeks and had over 60 witnesses and 700 pieces of evidence. During their opening statement, the prosecution presented a strong case. They alleged that this murder was planned and that Georgios was the mastermind, and that he considered Ally the ringleader of a group of disgruntled workers. He wanted to kill her to keep her quiet, to keep him out of trouble with the Department of Labor. But of course, the defense came forward with a totally different story in their opening. Jimmy was the monster, the defense claimed. Georgios was just an innocent bystander who walked into that deli that night and was shocked to find Jimmy standing over Ally's dead body. Then, Jimmy threatened him with a knife, saying he would kill him and his family if he didn't help him clean up and dispose of her body. His court-appointed attorney made him out to look like an upstanding businessman with a wife and 3 children who was coerced into helping Jimmy cover up his evil plan. They painted Jimmy as just an alcoholic drug user who was violent, emotional, and had deep hatred for women. His motive was either infatuation with Ally, who rejected his advances, or because Ally owed him money for drugs. However, in his interviews prior to his arrest, Georgios was saying, "Oh, Jimmy's my right-hand man. He's a great employee. He's Ally's buddy." And we know Jimmy had a girlfriend named Kristen, so was he really a woman hater, or was that Georgios? During the prosecution's case, however, evidence, including phone records, financial statements, and, of course, the Walmart security videos, definitely undermined Georgios' claims. In fact, his actions, such as stopping to buy an Almond Joy and a magazine right after the murder, were telling. It showed his state of mind at the time of the crime. It was indicative of a cold-blooded killer mentality. It didn't align with someone who just stumbled across this vicious murder and was being blackmailed against his will. The real story, according to the prosecution, was that on September 10th, an investigator came out from the Department of Labor unannounced. No one was at Local 9 except for Ally and another co-worker. So Ally did the right thing. She told them what she knew about Georgios' mistreatment of his employees, like how he didn't pay on time or sometimes didn't pay his employees at all, and how he would only pay in cash, never keeping any records. This caused many of the employees to quit. Ally was still there because she didn't have a car. She wanted to look for other jobs, but she couldn't drive to interviews or get to those jobs, especially if they weren't close by. She was so close to being able to afford her own apartment, so she just stuck it out. Ally didn't know that being honest about what was happening to her and her fellow employees would get her killed. So Ally tells Jimmy about the encounter with the Department of Labor investigator, thinking that he's a trusted friend. But he goes right to his boss, and Georgios becomes irate. Then, Georgios begins getting letters from the Department of Labor asking for payroll records. When he spoke to Ally about this, she stood up for herself and her co-workers by saying he needed to do the right thing, or she would expose him on social media and to the auditors. He needed to pay them what he owed. I was thinking, how many of us have either done this or said we were going to do this? Threatened to blast someone on social media if they didn't do the right thing. It's something so simple, but something so threatening in this case, and it didn't sit well with Georgios. Ally had been acting like the manager ever since Jimmy was always high and drunk on the job. She was the one dealing with the employees who weren't getting paid. She would blatantly tell them, "You're better than this place, and if you find another job, take it and run." Evidence showed that Ally was willing to make sacrifices for her colleagues. She wanted to make sure they were paid on time, and she would even tip them out of her own earnings before getting paid herself. But according to Jimmy, Ally aired the store's dirty laundry, and Georgios referred to her as a bitch on numerous occasions. She messed up all of his plans because he was on the verge of finalizing plans to move to a new location. Remember how he did that before? He was in one town, stopped working that shop, and opened up another one. He just keeps hopping from location to location, and I wonder why. But Ally was messing all of that up and ruining his reputation. Plus, the investigation into his business dealings showed he owed over $122,000 to the IRS and $70,000 to the state of New York, including unpaid payroll and sales tax. Ally threatened to continue to expose him if he didn't own up to it. But that's something he just wasn't willing to do. Instead, you know what was worth his time? Chilling his employee. There was also evidence that, following the crime, he bought custom-fitted plywood at a store and installed it on top of the flooring in his trunk. Why'd you do that? Then he proceeded to get his entire car detailed. This man's glasses were found at the disposal site where Ally's body was found. The defense tried to argue that this was because Jimmy grabbed them off of his face and threw them over there to silence Georgios. Georgios was claiming that Jimmy did this so that some evidence would belong to Georgios, and he wouldn't come forward and rat him out. That wasn't all. Georgios had been involved in fraudulent activities for more than 2 decades, so this was just the tip of the iceberg. Ultimately, the jury rejected his fictional tale and sided with the prosecution, finding Georgios Kavos guilty of all charges, including first-degree murder, on June 17, 2021. Now for sentencing. During a pre-sentencing interview, a probation officer came forward and said that he observed Georgios to be emotionless and detached. He failed to humanize his victim, Ally Lamont. He refused to call her by name and he kept calling her Allison, which is just total disrespect. During the course of the sentencing, Ally's family and loved ones read their victim impact statements, and I could hardly keep it together. Georgios was just emotionless. He's a father. Just think about that. I fail to understand how he can separate the love that he feels for his own children and the fact that he can kill someone else's daughter, a woman named Roberta Reen. The commissioner of the New York State Department of Labor, she made an unusual move. She wrote a letter to the court and requested a severe sentence for Georgios. The judge actually read this letter. Here it is now. It says, quote, "Elizabeth came forward in good faith to report labor law violations to the Department of Labor, to fight for justice for herself and her colleagues, and became the victim of the most heinous act of retaliation against a worker that the New York State Department of Labor has ever seen." The commissioner of the New York State Department of Labor, she made an unusual move. She wrote a letter to the court and requested a severe sentence for Georgios. The judge actually read this letter. Here it is now. It says, quote, "Elizabeth came forward in good faith to report labor law violations to the Department of Labor, to fight for justice for herself and her colleagues, and became the victim of the most heinous act of retaliation against a worker that the New York State Department of Labor has ever seen. I ask the court to consider the potential chilling effect in terms of sentencing that this murderer's actions will have on workers who seek to exercise a basic and fundamental right, the right to report mistreatment and violations of the law." Workers in New York State must be able to report labor law violations without fear of retaliation." End quote. It's true, all she was doing was the right thing, but sometimes it can go so wrong. Allie's sister, Brooke, spoke, and she said that when he took her sister, he took a part of her as well. While sobbing, she said, quote, "Allie was the light of the room, a contagious smile and a laugh you could never forget. She would help anybody unless you gave her a reason not to. She was strong, caring, loving, and hard-working, and you took that all away. You robbed her of the chance to ever get married, to have children, or simply be an aunt to her nieces and nephews. You tried to silence her, but she will always be remembered." She bravely went on to tell Georgios that he had no regard for human life. She said, "You disgust me. You make me physically sick. You're a woman-hating, narcissistic piece of who lies to get his own way." Allie's Aunt Tammy spoke and expressed the family's grief and loss, saying, quote, "To us, Allie will always be 22. We only have 22 years of memories of her. We will hold our memories in our hearts forever. I hope you never get a moment's peace for what you did. Your Honor, we ask that you sentence him to the same thing he sentenced us to, life without parole." In Allie's father's victim impact statement, he referred to his daughter as his hero. Allie's older sister also wrote to the court saying, quote, "She worked herself to death literally to try to achieve her personal and lifelong goals." End quote. And finally, it was Allie's mom's turn, and I could not hold it together during this. Some of the things she said were that he was a failure as a businessman and a failure as a human being, but she said, above all else, "Until the day you die, she will be in your head. You killed our daughter because you owed her money, and she stuck up for herself and others that you hurt. She wouldn't be quiet. For the rest of our lives, we will not be quiet." Well, that room was silent as the weight of her mom's words sunk in. She continued with, quote, "We will keep speaking about Elizabeth and the horrific acts that you committed to make sure you never had the chance to hurt anyone else." Georgios' lawyer appealed to the judge for a minimum sentence. He said that this was his client's first encounter with the criminal justice system, and he highlighted his status as a local business owner who provided employment to many people in the community. And that had me laughing. Are you serious? His lawyer also described him as a devoted husband and father of his 3 children, and this was supposed to mitigate his sentence. I mean, clearly he was one hell of a family man, right? Because he didn't forget to get his wife some laundry detergent, did he? That's right, that was for her. Even in the midst of a murder plot, he stopped and remembered to bring something home for his beloved wife. Unbelievable. But of course, the court didn't place much weight on this at all. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and Jimmy Duffy received a sentence of only 18 years to life. I say only because you never know. He offered a very simple apology to the Lamont family. All in all, Allie was forced to pay the ultimate price for Georgios' greed, despite attempting to make things right, not only for herself but for her co-workers. So this court's decision tried to bring some measure of justice to Allie and her family, but we know there's never closure. And though justice has been done, it doesn't amount to what this family lost. This story takes place in the year 2001, but it starts with a couple from a small town in Missouri, way back on September 8th, 1944. Millie and J.R. Weaver were in love, and they got married. 6 years later, in 1950, J.R. took over his father's business, a very well-known and respected garage door installation and repair company called Weaver Overhead Door Company. It was located in St. Joseph, Missouri. The company was founded back in 1937 by J.R.'s dad, George Weaver, and this company remains in business to this day. It's actually one of the oldest known family-owned garage door companies in the United States. Millie and J.R. were proud of the work they were doing, helping people in their community. Things were going well for them. They had accomplished a lot with inheriting the company and learning to run it successfully. But it was time for them to begin a new journey as parents. The Weavers ended up having 3 children, Robert, Lucia, and Kathy Sue, who everyone called Sue. The 3 children were very close, not only as siblings, but also as best friends. Because Lucia and Sue looked so similar, they would tell everyone they were twins. They were just born 8 years and 8 months apart, which was super cute. I remember being silly and saying that me and my cousins or friends were twins, but Sue and Lucia looked really similar. People actually believed they were twins. You can see just how similar they look in this picture, even with the 8-year age difference. They were very close. They were the type of brother and sisters that would do anything for one another. As the only son, Robert Weaver was set to take over his father's company when J.R. Weaver passed away. Inevitably, that happened in 1976. But being around an entrepreneur her whole life, Sue Weaver wanted to go into business as well, though not the family business. Instead, after high school, Sue attended the University of Missouri, eventually graduating with a degree in interior design. She was a very creative person, but she knew if she really wanted to be successful, she needed to understand business as well. So she went on to earn a master's in business administration, MBA, from the University of Kansas. Sue was a straight-A student. She was very competitive, driven, and intelligent. After obtaining her master's degree, Sue relocated to Raleigh, North Carolina, where she landed a full-time job as a loan officer at First Union Bank. Even after Sue moved, she and her sister Lucia talked every single day. It was part of their normal routine since they were born, basically. Not a single day went by that they didn't talk to one another, sharing everything happening, big and small. Sue would also mentor her younger sister Lucia and give her tips on opening her own business. That was just a part of who Sue was. She really enjoyed helping others. She was compassionate and loving, and that never changed as she got older. There was, however, something missing from Sue's life. Her goal in life was to be a wife and a mother, to pretty much emulate the family that she'd grown up in. Sue was surrounded by love and support as a child, especially since she had such a close relationship with her mom and her siblings. Without children of her own, she vicariously lived through her sister, Lucia. Lucia's children called Sue their second mother, and Sue's nieces and nephews were her pride and joy. They knew they could get whatever they wanted from their Aunt Susie, and they knew how to get spoiled by her. And she spoiled them. Aunt Sue was the best giver, especially during the holidays like Christmas. By 1994, Sue had a long, successful career in the banking industry for over 22 years, but she hadn't settled down yet, gotten married, or had children. She really felt like she regretted that, even though she was very proud of all that she had accomplished. But Sue decided it was time to move on. She was around 45 years old at the time, and she was ready to do something new with her life. She had kind of played it safe, but she wanted to do something she was passionate about, something artistic. The first thing she decided to do was get more serious with a guy she'd been dating. His name was Mike Chandler, and at the time, Mike was living in Florida. Sue would frequently fly to visit him. On one of those trips from North Carolina to Florida, Sue noticed an advertisement in an airline magazine during her flight. The ad was for an embroidery machine, and that really piqued her interest. It was like a light bulb went off, and in that moment, she knew she wanted to start her own embroidery business. It was that aha moment where she decided, I'm going to pivot my entire life. In that moment, Sue decided she was going to quit her corporate job, pick up her entire life and all of her belongings, and move to Florida with her boyfriend Mike. She was going to start her very own business, doing what set her heart on fire. She was all in, not only in business, but in her relationship with Mike. This move to the Sunshine State wasn't only about switching careers, it was about love. Sue truly hoped that moving to Florida and being closer to Mike would make their relationship stronger. She wasn't getting any younger, and she was really hoping that this would be her last relationship and that Mike would marry her. But at the time, the most important thing was to begin her own business. So that year, in 1994, Sue founded Embroidery Concept Incorporated. This is a custom embroidery digitizing company, and the process involves converting artwork into a digital file, putting it into the embroidery machine, which maps out where the needles will go to make the design. Kind of like a Cricut cutter in a way, but it doesn't do everything by itself. It's only as good as the artist. Sue was a natural. She was very talented, and it showed. It wasn't long before she was getting clients on a frequent and regular basis. Her business was becoming very popular, making Sue able to afford a lot more luxuries, like an airplane. Yep, Mike had his pilot's license, so Sue decided to take lessons to get hers, because she thought, if I'm going to be in the air with Mike, I want to know how to control the aircraft, just in case something were to happen. Their ultimate dream was to build their own plane, so they invested money into having one custom built for them. Now this was a small aircraft known as a Long EZ. Here's one on the screen now. I know how thrilling it is for people that like this kind of thing. And those people were Sue and Mike. They could not wait for their little two-seater tandem plane to be built. Sue invested a lot into this plane and into the relationship with Mike, but there still wasn't a marriage proposal. For now, it was still exciting, especially with their new project underway. Most long-easy planes have very limited storage space. They're small two-seaters, made of fiberglass, so they can go fast and be high performance while using a very energy-efficient engine. It was more about the thrill than taking long trips, even though some of them can go up to 2,000 miles. And you know what else was going strong? Mike and Sue's relationship. But was that a good thing? They had been together for almost a decade, and there still was no marriage proposal, no engagement, and no kids, which definitely were not in their future, because Sue was at the age where that didn't really seem like a possibility anymore. Their relationship was not stable. Sue felt that she really deserved more out of Mike. She wasn't sure what was stopping him from truly committing, but she would soon find out. Can you take a wild guess? You probably know, and you're probably right. Sue suspected something was off with Mike, so she looked at their phone bill, and sure enough, she saw an unknown number that he would constantly be calling and texting. When she looked at who the number belonged to, she found out it was another woman's number. Of course, she was devastated. She didn't want to jump to any conclusions. Maybe it was innocent, so she needed to test her theory. She needed proof. The very next time Mike said he was leaving for a business trip, she did something that was out of character. She called his hotel room, and sure enough, a woman answered the phone. And that was it. She was a big girl. Their relationship was falling apart. Cheating is really one of the worst things that someone can do to a person they claim to love and who truly loves them. Almost a decade of dating, no marriage, and now, no boyfriend either. But it was probably for the best. It's just too bad that Sue couldn't have found out sooner. Sue knew at this point she needed to move on and move out of the home she shared with Mike. Even though her relationship with Mike was crumbling, Sue's business, embroidery concept, was thriving. Her talent for making designs come to life through thread made her highly sought after by high-profile clients. A few of Sue's most recognized clients were Disney, Universal, and Warner Brothers. In addition, she embroidered state seals on leather chairs in state capitol buildings and designed wildlife patterns for a belt manufacturing company. She was not afraid of this new journey on her own. As sad as it was equally exciting, starting over on her own, her way. First thing on the list, a new house. Sue wanted something with a nice amount of land. She didn't want it to be in the city, surrounded by people and noise. She wanted something a little more private, and she found the most amazing spot. Sue bought a home in southwest Orlando in a suburb called Dr. Phillips on Palm Lake Circle. The suburb offers a variety of things to do and see while remaining somewhat removed from all the business of Orlando. If you've never been to Orlando, Florida before, it's basically the capital of tourism for the state. It's home to Disney World and Universal Studios and so much more. It was truly an ideal area, and this house sat on 2 acres of land. Sue loved gardening, so this was perfect for her. When I typed in Dr. Phillips suburb in Florida, which was weird by the way for a place instead of a person's name, the first thing I saw was the heading, Dr. Phillips, Orlando, a popular relocation destination, as the headline of one of the websites. And that's exactly what Sue was doing. She was relocating, and this area had a lot to offer. It was named after Dr. Philip Phillips, yes, double name. He was one of the very first millionaires in the city. He founded this community. Dr. Phillips had a medical degree from Columbia University, and then he became the owner of citrus groves in the 1940s and 50s. He came up with several important innovations in the packing and processing of orange juice, and he was the one who made Florida synonymous with orange juice. That's a pretty big deal. Until Dr. Phillips' invention, orange juice was preserved in cans, and let's just say it wasn't very tasty. But his flash pasteurization process enhanced the taste of the orange juice, and his business stretched to over 50,000 acres of citrus groves all around Orlando. Eventually, the area where the doctor had all these groves became known as Dr. Phillips. It's located just 10 minutes from Orlando and all the theme parks and 15 minutes from downtown. It's an ideal location, but it's also an upscale and affluent neighborhood. Not just anyone can afford to live there. Sue Weaver had worked hard to be able to get her dream home. Now Sue lived in a specific area of Dr. Phillips called Palm Lake Circle. It's a smaller area, more off the beaten path. It's a circle right here, With this dead-end road on one side, a lot of the homes have these really long driveways with lots of land, and the homes are kind of hidden, you can't really see them from the road. This is Sue's home right here, 5495 Palm Lake Circle. It had 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms with a pool. It was very gorgeous. Designing this home took all of Sue's time. Remember, she has a degree in interior design. She would spend hours creating the interior and the exterior, doing gardening and landscaping. She also loved being outdoors. Once Sue had settled in, she was happier than ever. Her sister's kids could not wait to come visit because Aunt Sue was the one who always gave them the best Christmas gifts. Well, now her gift was taking them to Disney World. Here's a home video of Sue and her niece and nephew having a really fun time together. They're with their family. Sue was finally set in her routine. She kept active by taking yoga classes in the morning and gardening in the afternoon. She was a very fit and active 52-year-old at the time, with a beautiful home and a thriving business. Sue was living her best life, that is until Monday, August 27th, 2001. Around 12:30 in the afternoon, a FedEx driver parked his truck outside Sue Weaver's home, ready to make a routine delivery, except something didn't seem right. The first thing he noticed was a noise. It kept repeating. As he got closer, he could hear it more clearly. It was the sound of a smoke alarm going off. And where there's smoke, there's usually a fire. So the FedEx driver was on high alert right away, looking around, trying to figure out what was going on. The incessant beeping would not stop as he approached Sue's door. That's when he could smell smoke. His job was to deliver mail, so normally he would drop the package off, ring the doorbell, and leave unless someone needed to sign for something. But he could not leave without knowing whether or not this house was on fire, or worse, if there was someone inside in danger. So he knocked on the door, but no one was answering. He decided to attempt to open the door, and surprisingly, it was unlocked. So he opened it just a little bit and yelled inside. He shouted, but there was no response. As he peeked his head inside, that's when his worst fears became a reality. He saw flames and smoke in Sue's living room. Her house was on fire. He immediately ran back to his truck and called 911. There wasn't a lot of damage to the main portions of the home, but as they got closer to the master bedroom, they saw more of the damage. It was in that specific area, especially at the door to Sue's room. It's astounding just how much damage a fire can do to a brand new home. Everything before the fire was in perfect condition, but look at the entrance to Sue's room after the fire destroyed it. You can still see portions of the hallway and the kitchen which look untouched, but then there's this sharp contrast between those rooms and the master bedroom. The dark walls, the burned wallpaper, soot covering the dresser. It's night and day, and it's just devastating. All that hard work Sue had put in was destroyed in an instant. If you look at this picture, you see that some of the items are partially burned, and then there's this demarcation between those items and the other surfaces that have more soot and burns. This is evidence, and it can help investigators determine how the fire spread and where the point of origin may be. As you can see here, the carpet wasn't burned throughout the room, but there's this pattern of burned debris scattered. You can even see some insulation lying near a chair and other items strewn around the room. What they think is that some of these items were set on fire with the hope that the whole room would catch on fire. The door in particular sustained more damage, and it looked as though the fire began low to the ground in this area. As they went deeper into the bedroom, they saw more and more damage, especially as they got closer to the bed and the surrounding area. The bed was almost entirely burned. It was charred black on the top portion, but it looked as though the fire had not reached the bottom half, since you can still see the white bed skirt underneath. As the firefighters got closer, they lifted the comforter, and that's when they were shocked. They found a victim lying across the burned bed. There was a naked body on the bed, underneath the comforter, completely charred, though there was a small portion of skin on the legs and feet that was not completely burned. They determined the victim was a white female, and that's all they knew in this moment, and that is just heartbreaking. What happened? So many fires can start with something as simple as a candle that's kept burning while someone sleeps, and they can't escape. They don't have time because they're inhaling the smoke in that room. The investigators look around, searching for clues. They want to know who this person is, and they discover a wallet on the dresser. Inside, they find a license, and on the license is the name Kathy Sue Weaver with a current address listed. She was the only person found in the home, so they believed that this was the identity of the victim. They cannot remove anything, not even the body at this point. They have to examine more closely. That's when they realize that this fire was not an accident, or at the least, Sue probably did not start it. This is because her hands were tied behind her back, and her feet and legs were tied together. They looked at these restraints and thought that they resembled a cut-up t-shirt. When they looked around, they located a shirt with tatter marks in it in the bathroom above the shower, as shown in this picture. But it gets more upsetting, because as they examined the rest of the body, they noticed that she was gagged and her face was covered with a towel. I cannot imagine having to uncover all of this. You realize this isn't just a fire. It's not an accident. Someone had tried to cover up what they did to poor Sue. The first thing that stood out to them was this towel covering her head. When someone covers a victim's head, this is usually an indication that the perpetrator knew the victim. In some cases, it may signify an emotional attachment to the victim. It's connected to a feeling of disgust at what they have just done. Sue was murdered. Was it someone that she was close to? At this point, Sue's body was transported to the coroner's office, while investigators continued to search her home. Back at the crime scene, an investigator finds something that he thinks may be a very crucial clue. It's a 9-volt battery. Not the most common type. It's one of those rectangular ones. It was found in the kitchen on the counter, and it's significant because, as most of us know, these are the type of batteries that are found in smoke detectors. We all know that when they start going off, making noise, it's because these batteries die. While investigators look around, they notice that there are smoke alarms missing batteries on the wall and on the roof inside the house. One of them, close by, had the slot still open, and the battery was removed. They figure the chances that Sue had taken these batteries out herself were slim to none. Instead, they think that this was a way for the perpetrator to let a lot of time pass before anyone noticed this fire. The homes that I showed you are set back from the road and are not very close to one another. However, the noise could travel, especially since these alarms make so much noise repetitively. Someone would have been bound to notice if they were all going off. Thankfully, the FedEx driver got close enough to hear at least one of those alarms that still had the battery inside. There were other smoke detectors that were ripped entirely out of the wall. The investigators believed that this fire was deliberately set to conceal evidence of Sue's murder. Now it's time for the homicide detectives to join in on this investigation. Meanwhile, the officers have gotten word on the official identification of the body from the morgue. They are now tasked with notifying Sue's family of her death. Even though Sue's sister Lucia lived in Texas, I told you that they never went a day without talking to one another. Lucia and her husband Mike were actually planning to retire and move close to Sue. They were even planning to open up an embroidery shop together. Like Sue, Lucia had her own embroidery shop in Texas, and they agreed that as sisters they would work on these projects together and do things they were passionate about, playing golf, enjoying the sunshine in their spare time. In just 2 weeks after Sue and Lucia had made that promise, Lucia was learning that her sister had been murdered. Lucia got the call when she was at work, and she just broke down. Her world became a blur. She could barely speak. Her employee knew something was going on. She knew something wasn't right, so she dialed Lucia's husband Mike immediately and told him to get there as fast as he possibly could. She didn't want to believe this was true, and she felt this deep sense of guilt. She was the one who convinced Sue to buy the home on Palm Lake Circle in Dr. Phillips. It actually terrified Lucia that the house Sue bought to fulfill her dreams had ended in a nightmare. It was the longest day of Sue's brother Robert's life. He did not understand how anyone could do this. It was so senseless and so brutal. No one expects to hear that their loved one has died, but he said that it would have been better if something tragic had happened, like a car accident, because it would make more sense. But in this case, he was so confused about who would do this. Authorities want to understand how this fire was started, and usually, when it comes to someone setting a fire on purpose, they use an accelerant, so the fire will start very quickly and spread even quicker than it would naturally. The fire investigation team brings in dogs, which have a special ability to recognize the scent of accelerants. These dogs can pinpoint where the flammable or combustible liquids were used. When the dog finds this area, they sit down. The dog senses the presence of a liquid, and he sits. He did this a number of times all around Sue's bed. Finding this is just one of the first signs of premeditation. It means that someone brought an accelerant to the scene. This indicates they had the intent to set a fire. They planned this, even more so in the case of a murder, because they intended to cover up their crime before they even committed it. Investigators want more. The more evidence they have that this murder was planned, the better chance they have of not only finding the killer, but putting them behind bars. They don't want to leave any doubts, so they begin to look for signs around the home, this time on the exterior. They're looking for signs of forced entry, such as a broken lock or shattered windows, and they find none. Again, like the towel, this can indicate that the killer knew the victim, or at the very least, they were familiar or comfortable enough to be allowed inside Sue's home. They know that robbery doesn't seem to be the motive because the valuables were left behind, and Sue's purse, covered with soot, was found on her dresser in the master bedroom. It still had her wallet inside. The investigators find something else, another, even more telling piece of evidence that piqued their interest. While they're investigating the outside of the house, they come to the front door area and see a large envelope containing tax documents propped up right outside the door. The envelope was from a man named Jeff Pryor, and the thing is, it looked as though it was hand-delivered because there was no postage on it. Investigators take this document and mark it as evidence, knowing that this Jeff Pryor was someone they definitely wanted to speak with regarding Sue's murder. Everyone is a suspect until proven otherwise. Everything is a clue. Investigators surveyed Sue Weaver's neighborhood and asked the neighbors if anything seemed amiss on August 27, 2001. Sue's neighbors said they did not notice anything unusual that day, but a young boy who lived just a couple of houses down said he saw Sue while waiting for the school bus. He saw her taking out the trash, and she was in workout clothes around 7 a.m. They started a timeline of Sue's final hours after that sighting. According to Sue's friends, she typically went to yoga every day in the morning. When investigators visited the yoga studio and spoke to the staff, they discovered that Sue attended the class and left around 8:30 a.m. Since the studio was only about 10 minutes away from Sue's home, the investigators determined she probably arrived home before 9 a.m. The autopsy was complete, and I want to tell you what they found. The autopsy determined that Sue died as a result of blunt force trauma to her head. The damage to Sue's skull was shocking because it was completely shattered. The medical examiner also found evidence that the killer had forced himself on her before her murder, leaving behind semen with his DNA. Investigators theorized that someone was stalking Sue, waiting for her to come home from her morning yoga class. People in the neighborhood didn't always lock their doors, and they don't think Sue locked hers that morning either. The perpetrator was already inside, or he crept in while Sue was in the shower. They think that she showered because she had just finished yoga class, and there were a couple of towels found nearby. She was also completely nude, and the clothes that the boy described her wearing that morning were just outside the shower. This is absolutely terrifying. This is such a vulnerable moment in time, when you're relaxed, enjoying the hot water and the steam. You're so comfortable and calm. To think that someone is about to pounce is just horrifying. They can't be sure whether Sue came out of the shower, or if she was still inside when the killer decided to make his move. Either way, Sue was overpowered, bound, taken advantage of, and then her life was ended, with a fire started to try to get rid of all the evidence. There are no real positives to anything in this case, but investigators do point out that Sue was not alive during the fire, and it was not her cause of death because there was no indication that Sue ever inhaled any smoke. Therefore, the family could at least rest assured that she did not suffer through the agony of being burned. Not that the way she suffered was any better. It's absolutely heartbreaking. The DNA that they found was sent off to the state lab in an attempt to find a match in CODIS. But if you're familiar with this process, especially if they don't have any known suspects to compare the DNA to, this can be a lengthy process. There are backlogs and limited DNA technology, which meant investigators would probably have to wait months before they ever got a match, if they ever did. Meanwhile, Sue Weaver's funeral was held in a Memorial Park cemetery in the small Midwestern town of St. Joseph, Missouri, where the Weaver children grew up. At her older sister's funeral, Lucia felt like her heart had broken into pieces. She said the pain was deeper than she could have ever imagined, and she asked God why. She felt like she would not be able to live without Sue. In that moment, Lucia decided that she would persevere in honor of Sue. Lucia promised to find her killer, whatever it would take, and she would never let Sue's murder be in vain because she would make a difference in her memory, somehow, some way. That is what kept Lucia strong. The very first thing the investigators wanted to do was track down anyone close to Sue who may have known her daily routine, someone who knew where she went every day when she would be home. When investigators questioned those closest to Sue, one name kept coming up: Mike Chandler, Sue's ex-boyfriend. When they asked family and friends these questions, they usually started out by being pretty blunt and saying, "Who do you think did this?" So Mike definitely needed to be looked into. A woman named Anne, one of Sue's friends, told the investigators, "The impression that I was left with is that it had been, I won't say a bitter breakup, but it was definitely a significant one. She felt betrayed, but I also got the impression that he was not welcome in her house." This was indeed significant to investigators, especially because it was a recent breakup with a longtime boyfriend, someone who was very close to Sue, someone who knew her schedule, someone she may have let into her home or at least recognized and possibly talked to. The investigators found it even more troubling when Anne told them that she would bet money that Mike murdered Sue. She said that it wasn't right for her to assume something so horrific, but as far as she was concerned, random people don't burn down houses after they commit a crime. She just felt like whoever did this had something to cover up. After Sue and Mike broke up, Anne said she got the impression that Sue was scared of Mike. Other friends of Sue said that there were also financial issues between Mike and Sue. Lucia told investigators that she was the one to really encourage her sister to break it off with Mike, to move on and to move out permanently. When Sue showed her a picture of that house on Palm Lake Circle, Lucia said, "Yes, that's it. Go for it. Buy it, because you deserve better than someone like Mike." After all, this was a man who strung her along for close to a decade, years and years of promises, only to find out he was talking to another woman and continuing to drag his feet. Could there be a reason he didn't want to lose Sue altogether, even though he didn't want to fully commit? They wanted to find out. While waiting for the DNA comparison results to come back from CODIS, the investigators interviewed Mike Chandler himself. Mike confirmed he had indeed been dating Sue for several years. During the interview, the investigators explained that they knew Sue moved out, and they kind of said it in a way where they wanted to get Mike to tell them why. The investigators said, "So Sue left. She moved out kind of abruptly," and Mike replied, "Yes, sir." Then they asked if Sue had any animosity after the breakup, and according to Mike, Sue got very upset when she caught him having these phone conversations with another woman. He explained that Sue had the wrong impression of the woman he was talking to. She was just a friend. He tried to qualify this by saying that the other woman was married and had stepchildren, but what does that matter? Mike completely denied that he ever had an affair. It was all just a misunderstanding. Wow, so Sue would just react to this drastically over a misunderstanding? She would just break it off, move out, and buy a new home? But he went on to explain that they had only been living together for a little over 4 years, even though they were together for close to a decade. Yes, Sue was upset with him, but their breakup wasn't nasty. He said there wasn't any fussing and fighting. I want to show you some of the videos of the happier times with Sue and Mike together. Here they are in their kitchen, smiling. They look like a normal couple. But we all know that things can be very different behind closed doors. Investigators asked Mike where he was on August 27th, and he told them that he woke up around 5 a.m. He took a shower, was just messing around the house, and then left for work around 8:15 or 8:30. They asked him, "Do you have a secretary or someone that can corroborate these details?" He said, "You know, I don't, but the office has an open door. Anyone can see me as they pass by." Since there was no concrete evidence to hold Mike, investigators let him go while they tried to verify his alibi. Meanwhile, they went back to that list and pulled the name that was on that envelope. Remember the envelope that was left right outside the door of Sue's home? It had some tax documents inside, and the name on the envelope was Jeff Pryor. So they brought Jeff in for an interview and asked him how he knew Sue. Jeff replied that they had a business relationship. When Sue was looking for homes in Orlando, she contacted him. He became her real estate agent and arranged the appointments to show her the houses, including the one that she ended up purchasing. As Jeff Pryor guided Sue through this home buying process, the two of them became pretty close friends. Having helped Sue purchase the home, Jeff said he had been in her place a number of times. But what the investigators wanted to know was, does he have a key? Does he come and go as he pleases? How close is close when you say you have a close relationship? Were you there on August 27th? According to Jeff, Sue contacted him a week or so prior, asking him if he could put together some documents regarding property taxes for the house. So he prepared those documents for her, and on that Monday morning, he drove over to drop them off. He said that he arrived at Sue's house somewhere around 8:45 in the morning on August 27th. But because it was early, he didn't want to wake Sue by knocking or ringing the doorbell, because it just wasn't necessary, so he just leaned the envelope right on the front door area and left. Investigators wanted to know, did you smell any smoke at her house? And he said no. Jeff was acting really nervous. It was so obvious. Investigators just kept asking what happened next, and he told them nothing. I just drove to work after that. I just dropped off the papers and I left. That was it. So investigators conducted a follow-up investigation to see if they could verify Jeff's alibi. When they interviewed Jeff's wife, she said she was shocked to learn that something so tragic had happened to Sue. She told her husband, "You know they're gonna think you did it, right?" She also told the investigators that he was very scared because he didn't want to take the blame for something that he did not do. All he did was drop those papers off in the morning. That's it. Later, Jeff's colleagues confirmed that he was indeed at work that morning, which eliminated him as a suspect at that time. However, going back to Mike Chandler, his co-workers told a different story. They could not tell investigators when they saw him. Some said, "Yeah, I remember him being at work on August 27th, but I'm not sure when he arrived or when he left." In the days following Sue's murder, the media began running stories about what happened. There were news stations doing entire segments about this brutal act committed upon Sue. Something like this in a town like Sue's was big news. The fact that this was a single, independent, successful woman who had this beautiful new home in an upscale neighborhood, that she could be murdered like this in the comfort of her own home, really struck fear in the community and beyond. Your home is supposed to be your safe place. To think that it could happen in a place like that really put things into perspective, that this could happen to anyone. Because of all this media attention, there were tons of tips piling in, but they didn't amount to much. Time was going by, and Sue's family was getting desperate. They started to think that this murder was never going to be solved. But a profile was starting to be put together. This had to be a person who wasn't stable, someone deranged, someone without remorse. They must be angry and full of rage to commit such a gruesome crime. However, they didn't have any suspects. There was one lead that kept Mike Chandler on the investigators' radar. Sue's friend actually called in the tip herself, and it was about Mike being a part owner of Sue's business, Embroidery Concept Incorporated. Was this what they meant by financial issues between them? Was this the reason Mike stuck around, even though he was talking to another woman behind Sue's back? Could this have been the reason Sue was murdered? And that's not all. This friend tells the investigators that Sue and Mike owned a plane together. Remember the plane? Well, this was concerning. The friend said Sue did not know what Mike was capable of since he was going to lose so much in their breakup. They brought Mike Chandler right back into the police station, questioning him once again. Here's how that conversation went. When they asked him about the plane, he said it wasn't really an ownership or a partnership or anything like that, even though Sue invested in the project by paying for the standing and finishing of a couple of wings, and she threw a couple of radios in it. That was it. So were Sue and her family just confused? Investigators didn't think so, but there was no solid evidence to arrest Mike. They needed to figure out who else Sue was connected to. And while sorting through all of her business paperwork, they found a very interesting document. One of Sue's clients had written her a bad check, a check that bounced due to insufficient funds, and it was for about $400. This person was a longtime client named Daryl Etheridge, but it didn't matter. It was still a financial issue that had a negative effect on her business. As far as Sue's friends were concerned, there was bad blood between her and Daryl because he never paid back those funds. So investigators interviewed him, and according to Daryl, he had been a client for 7 years. Yes, of course. Okay, fine. I owed Sue $472, but he said he had a plan to pay her back. He stated that he told Sue it was on his company's list of things that they needed to take care of. However, because of how long it was taking Daryl to pay off his debt, investigators asked him, "Was there friction between you and Sue?" But Daryl insisted, "No, there were no hard feelings between us." Once again, investigators had no solid evidence to hold Daryl, so they had to let him go. They were without options until the DNA results came back, which hopefully would be soon. No lead in these cases is too small or too far-fetched. Investigators pursue every single one. They asked Sue's friends and family whether they could tell them what was going on in Sue's life in the weeks leading up to her murder. Her sister said that she had just visited her the week before her murder. She remembered Sue was having problems with her air conditioning, and this may have been overlooked. But Sue's friend Barbara also mentioned something about Sue's air conditioning system. She lived close by, and Barbara said, "I know that Sue was getting her air ducts to her air conditioning cleaned because I was the one who gave her a referral for a company that I previously used." But this was all the way back in February. This was not recent. It was a good 6 months earlier. However, investigators didn't care. They wanted all the information about this company, so Barbara provided the name of a department store. It was a Florida chain called Burdine's. Oh my God, I remember these stores. They're no longer around. They actually turned into Macy's stores. They were super popular back in the 80s, 90s, and I think even into the early 2000s until 2005. Burdine's department stores were all throughout Florida, and they were known as the Florida Store. These Burdine stores were once decorated with palm trees and tropical colors, and they were in business for over 100 years. They expanded rapidly from 1999 to 2001 and opened 7 new stores, including the Florida Mall in Orlando, which was one of Burdine's most popular locations. However, as the years went by, things changed. On January 30th, 2004, the store changed to Burdine's Macy's, and later in 2005, Burdine's was dropped altogether and they rebranded them as Macy's. Let me know if you remember this department store. So investigators are sifting through all of Sue's financial records, and they find a check that she made out to Burdine's for $411. They call the store to inquire about this transaction, but the store says they do not offer air conditioning services. However, they do partner with subcontractors that would carry out that work when a customer needed it. So investigators want to know who Burdine's contracted for the work done on Sue's home. They give investigators the name John Pratt. He's an independent contractor, and he worked with Burdine's. They contact him, and he says, "Yes, I went out to Sue's to repair her air conditioning system and to conduct the air duct cleaning at the direction of this Burdine's department store." This was 6 months before Sue's murder. John Pratt responded to a work call at Sue's house in February 2001. While John cleaned the air ducts, he told investigators that Sue was there the entire time. He describes her as friendly and personable, and when investigators asked him, was Sue attractive, John responded by saying, "Yes, very." He added that she was a very beautiful woman, but he insists he had nothing to do with her murder. They asked John if he worked there by himself at Sue's house that February, and he said no. An employee of his, Jeff Heffling, was helping him out that day. The next step was for them to look into the contractor, Jeff Heffling. They really felt like they were on the right track when they pulled up his record, because Jeff was currently on probation for what, yo? In 1980, when Jeff Heffling was only 17 years old, he was convicted of holding a 33-year-old woman hostage and forcing himself upon her. This happened on January 20th, 1980. Jeff attacked this woman while she was jogging, and after forcing her into a wooded area, he overpowered her and forced himself on her. But she was able to get away. He was caught 1 month later when residents of this very same neighborhood called 911 to report a peeping Tom. At that time, a judge sentenced Jeff to 4 years of detention in a juvenile detention center. This was for youth offenders because he was under the age of 18. But before all this, throughout all of his years in high school, Jeff was a star athlete and an excellent student. Before this incident, in January of 1980, Jeff had never been in trouble with the law, so the judge believed this may just be a one-time offense. After he was released from juvenile detention, Jeff found himself behind bars at 22 years old. On November 15, 1985, police officers stopped Jeff's vehicle and found out that he was driving on a suspended license. He was arrested, however, because his vehicle matched the description of a car that was seen at a burglary where another woman had said she was forced to engage in acts against her will. Officers went and searched the vehicle of the woman that Jeff had been dating at the time. They found a towel with penguins on it. This towel matched the description of a towel that the victim said was stolen from her home. Inside the towel was a gun. Jeff was charged with several crimes, including sexual battery, armed burglary, grand theft, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and the use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. I know this is a lot, but there are reasons why I tell you all this. After this, Circuit Court Judge Robert McGregor agreed not to sentence Jeff Heffling to more than 30 years in prison. That's when Jeff said, "I'm going to plead no contest to the charges." According to the state guidelines, he should have been imprisoned for 40 years to life, but clearly he got out sooner because he's been living in the Orlando area on probation. So what happened? This is a serious offense. The woman that Jeff attacked reported that he broke into her home, pulled out a gun, jumped on her, forced himself on her, and then forced her into the shower, watching her as she cleaned herself off so that no evidence was left behind. And then, you know what he did later? He stole her wallet and then left. She was so lucky that nothing else happened. At the sentencing hearing, Jeff's parents actually testified in his defense. They told the judge that they believed their son when he said he didn't remember anything. He didn't remember committing the crime. But the judge told his parents that he was hesitant to believe that. He didn't think Jeff was telling him the truth. The judge said, "I can't accept that. I believe that he's lying to me." However, Jeff was released on parole in 1998 at the age of 35. He had served less than half of his prison sentence, and after this release, Jeff moved right back in with his parents in Orlando. Eventually, he did land a job as an air conditioning repair person, and he had diligently been working ever since. By all accounts, he was changing for the better. Not only was Jeff reporting to work regularly, but he was also attending his weekly therapy sessions. There were, however, some people who were not happy that Jeff was returning to their community. One resident of his parents' neighborhood passed out flyers with Jeff's picture, detailing his criminal past, and he put them on everyone's door. However, there were other neighbors that did not appear to be very concerned. As far as they could tell, Jeff had cleaned up his act and was always so kind and so polite to everyone. Well, after researching Jeff's background, investigators on Sue's case were more interested in speaking with him, and he agreed to meet with them at the police station for questioning. During Jeff's interview, investigators showed him a picture of Sue. They said that she lived over in the Dr. Phillips community, and they asked if he recognized her. Jeff responded, "No, she didn't look familiar." The investigators were surprised by how calm Jeff was. His confident demeanor made it seem like he was telling them the truth. He was acting almost like, "Why am I even here?" So they clarified by saying that they just wanted to know if maybe he had ever done any air conditioning work or something like that at her house. But he maintained that he did not know who this woman was. He said, "I don't know. Like I said, I don't recognize the lady." Shocked by what these investigators were telling him, Jeff asked how he was all tied up in this anyway. That's when the investigators told him that in addition to her being brutally murdered, she had been a victim of a man forcing themselves on her. That's when he let out this sigh, like, okay, it looks like I'm gonna have to consult my attorney. It was almost like a sigh saying, because of my past, you're accusing me of this? Then he went on to say things like, "You know what? This just isn't right. This is just wrong." Almost like he felt he was being wrongly accused of something just because he had done things in the past. After that, investigators could no longer question Jeff. Even though they had a feeling that he did have something to do with Sue's murder, they didn't have enough evidence to hold him, so they had to let him go. This always bothers me, especially when they have something that could potentially connect to the crime scene. It's obvious that this man worked for this John Pratt, who said that they were subcontracted to repair Sue's air conditioning, and John says that Jeff was in Sue's home but is just denying it. So who is lying? Did Jeff do something, or did John? A team of investigators conducted a background investigation into Jeff Heffling. They wanted to know everything about him. They drove around Orlando, interviewing his friends, family, and co-workers, and their main goal was to speak to his girlfriend, Denise Anderson. When investigators did talk to Denise, they asked for his alibi. They wanted to know what Jeff was doing at the time of Sue Weaver's murder, and Denise responded that she couldn't give them an alibi. So they went on to tell Denise what they suspected Jeff may have done to Sue Weaver, all the gory details. That's when she decided to cooperate with them. She wants to help them gather more information. Denise told investigators that she would wear a wire and try to get Jeff to confess to killing Sue during a phone call. During this conversation between Denise and Jeff, Denise informs Jeff that the police had come to see her, and she told him that they wanted to know if she could confirm Jeff's alibi for the day of Sue's murder on August 27th. Either she's playing along, or she really did think this, but she was saying, "I'm positive that I'm with you without a doubt in your mind. Do you know that we were together that day?" Jeff assured Denise that they were together that morning. He said, "Yes, I know we were together," because he reminded Denise that they always spent Monday mornings together. But still, Denise just said she couldn't recall being with him that morning, and she asked, "Why can't I remember?" He was trying to jog Denise's memory, so Jeff told her that he remembers it was a day when he had to drop her off at the hair salon and then had to go get an oil change. He confidently tells her that he remembers that. Then Denise asked him, "And you didn't go anywhere else?" That's when Jeff says, "Well, I might have gone to the bar, but I'm not sure." So Denise decides to check receipts that the couple saved, and she tells him, "You're right, you were at the bar." He asked her what time, and she said she didn't know. I don't know if the receipt didn't say that information, I'm not sure. But on the call, Denise said to Jeff, "I don't think you would hurt me, but would you hurt someone else?" Honestly, that's a pretty brave question to ask him. I would be really afraid of his answer, but Jeff says, "Baby, I don't want to hurt nobody." Then Denise flat out asked him, "Is it a sickness?" So she obviously did know about his past. Jeff sounded exhausted, like there were so many questions, and he said, "I swear I have no recollection." Denise asked him, "You realize that this person beat this woman and they put her on fire? What is that?" It was almost like she knows he might have done it. Jeff says, "You know me better than that." But Denise snaps back, asking, "Do I know you?" At that point, I could hear the fear in her voice. I don't know if she really knew whether she knew her boyfriend and what he was capable of or not. She asked Jeff if he wanted to get all the cards out on the table, basically saying, "Do you want to just come clean to me? Tell me if you did it, what you did." Investigators were listening closely to every word during this phone conversation. Denise was being kind of aggressive at this point. Listening to this recording, I was not sure if Denise was referring to his past and accusing him of doing what he did, or accusing him of what happened to Sue. After a few times, I'm pretty sure she was referring to his past when she said, "How could you be with a woman and then go force yourself on somebody? Who does that? And who gave you the right to do that?" He had done this prior. He had a girlfriend when he was convicted all those years ago. He said, "Nobody gave me that right," and he admits it's a sickness. Okay, wow, I don't know, because it seems like Denise led him into using those words to describe what he had done before. In a shaky voice, Denise asked Jeff if the sickness had come back. Basically, this was her way of asking, "Did you do it again to Sue?" To which he replied, "No, the sickness hadn't come back." But he truly sounded exhausted to me, like he just wanted this conversation to be over with. Jeff reminded Denise that he had remorse for his past, that he didn't want to hurt anybody, that he was empathetic towards people, and he tells her that she knows that. Denise asked him if he loves her, and Jeff replied, "With all my heart." The last thing Denise asked Jeff is, "Are you sorry about what happened?" To which he replied, "Yes, he was." But again, this was referring to what he did in his past. It wasn't as though Jeff was confessing to anything. But they may not need a confession, because that same afternoon, a Florida Department of Law Enforcement agent called the investigators. According to the agent, the DNA at Sue's crime scene matched DNA in CODIS. He told the homicide investigators that the results matched a convicted offender whose DNA was submitted to the database back in 1998. The DNA was collected after he was released from prison on parole following a brutal attack less than 15 years ago. His name, Jeff Heffling. It disturbs me because he sounded so genuine on that call. I feel like I really fell for it, and I'm so glad they had DNA, because it doesn't lie. Investigators had enough to get a warrant for Jeff's arrest. They immediately contacted the felony squad, which finds these wanted criminals with active warrants, and they arrested him. They were informed that Jeff had an active warrant for his arrest for the murder of Sue Weaver. Jeff had an appointment that evening on West Colonial Drive in Orlando for a therapy appointment. Investigators informed the felony squad, and they were there waiting for him when he got out. When Jeff finished his therapy appointment, the agents apprehended him right in the parking lot. Across Florida, residents were furious when the news broke that a two-time convicted offender was responsible for this crime. The founder of a nonprofit called Speaking Out Against the R-Word in Orlando, her name is Kelly Green. She told the Orlando Sentinel that these types of offenders should stay in prison for life, especially repeat offenders whose crimes usually escalate. That seems to be what happened in this case. Kelly was also intrigued by Jeff's parole officer's decision to allow him to get a job at an air conditioning company that gave him access to homes with women living in them. She was concerned that Jeff, a convicted offender, had a job that gave him easy access to vulnerable people who believe that they're safe in their own homes. What was interesting is that I found a newspaper article where they interviewed some neighbors of Jeff's. Edmundo Medal and his wife Claudina, along with their son, Caesar, were interviewed. They lived just a few houses down from Jeff for the past 13 years, and Claudina said that they never worried about Jeff. They added that he walked his small gray dog around the block every day and was always extremely polite. He drove away in his pickup truck to work every day and never caused any problems. But Caesar said that, given his history, this arrest is not surprising at all. However, they had honestly believed he had cleaned up his act. You know what? I mentioned this in another video because it's on my mind, but this reminds me so much of the friends who are coming forward about the arrest made in the University of Idaho case. In that case, people come forward and say, you know, we thought he cleaned up his act. Guess not. That person in the Idaho case used to be a drug user. I guess all of that really can be very deceiving. If indeed he's convicted, right? Maybe some people overcompensate because they do have something to hide. So maybe they're overly nice, overly polite, making sure not to make any missteps. Jeff's father and mother said that they're devastated by the arrest of their son. Several friends of theirs gathered at their home to show them support. His dad, Jim, said that he thought his son, Jeff, was redeeming himself. He had a job, he was going to therapy routinely, and his dad said, he has been a very good person. He was always responsible. We're a loving family. I understand that this is this person's flesh and blood, but he's convicted of harming other people's flesh and blood, and now he's arrested for potentially murdering someone. I don't care how loving their family was or is. This man has already shown his true character for what he did in his past. But the father went on to add that he's innocent until proven guilty. Isn't that the law? I agree, but I'm referring to his past. We know what he did to 2 other women, regardless of this current situation, and those things were not loving. They were not responsible or something a good person would do, period. Think about what Sue's family was going through the day that Jeff's DNA was linked to the crime. It was the same day that Sue's siblings were said to meet with Sue's friend Barbara and the detectives at Sue's house for the very first time since her murder. But they got a phone call from Barbara, and she said, "Listen, the detective isn't meeting with us because they know who killed your sister." Lucia just lost it. She cried harder than she ever had allowed herself to this entire time. Sue's brother was excited and ecstatic, but he was still apprehensive because he didn't know what was going to happen. He was hoping that Jeff wouldn't walk. He wanted him to be held responsible. Judging by what happened in the past, there were definitely reasons to be concerned. However, the investigators say otherwise. They believe this trial would result in a major conviction, especially with Jeff's DNA. There was no explanation for why it would have been there. Jeff had a girlfriend, we know that. Jeff had no connection to Sue. He wasn't dating her, because her friends and her sister would have been aware of that. He lived 30 minutes away. No one had ever heard about him or saw him over there with Sue. The only connection was the air conditioning job. That's it. So his DNA being inside her meant he was the last person to engage in that act with her and the last person to see her alive and also dead. In this case, he thought he covered his tracks. He expected the house to go up in flames, but it didn't. Jeff Heffling's probation officer actually spoke out after his arrest, saying they informed his employer of his criminal history. He also said that Jeff was never prohibited from working in people's homes. The officer stated there was nothing in his probation that would restrict it. So who dropped the ball? How far do you need to go back to figure this out? Florida Department of Corrections Regional Probation Director Joe Hayden said that the state could not have kept Jeff behind bars or prevented him from accepting a job in which he would have had access to people's homes because inmates were being released by the truckload due to overcrowding. When Jeff entered prison, his early release was inevitable and not so concerning because it's still happening today. According to Joe, convicted felons are allowed the chance to earn a living. And considering that Jeff had trade skills in air conditioning repair, Joe said it was impossible to deny him that kind of work. In November 2001, a grand jury indicted Jeff Heffling on charges of first-degree murder, but that case never went to trial. Because there was so much evidence, Jeff pleaded guilty, allowing the prosecutor to remove the death penalty from consideration. The plea agreement stipulated that Jeff would be sentenced to life without parole for second-degree murder, and he is currently serving his sentence at the Marion County Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. They had the right guy. The question still remained, why did he come back to Sue's home 6 months after he worked on her air conditioning? Why Sue? He only met her once. The state has their theory. These types of offenders hold on to things in their minds. From the first day he saw her, he was most likely thinking about her non-stop, even pleasuring himself to thoughts of her. It became so overwhelming that he had to get actual release from committing this crime. The attorneys who handled Sue's estate filed a lawsuit against Berdine's department store a year after her murder. Despite Jeff's 12-year sentence, Berdine's apartment store never performed a background check on him. The lawsuit was settled in March of 2004. Berdine's agreed to pay Sue's estate $9 million. No background check was done by Burdines or the subcontractor that hired him. During Jeff's incarceration, his DNA was linked to another brutal attack in 1984. This wouldn't have happened, but after hearing about Jeff's arrest, a detective in Winter Springs, Florida, decided to investigate another unsolved case to determine whether Jeff may have been to blame. The detective uncovered the unsolved 1984 incident in Winter Springs, where a woman was forced into intercourse against her will and stabbed. DNA testing was not available in 1984, but they preserved the DNA. When they tested it, it came back to Jeff in 2004. The Orlando Sentinel reported that after Jeff's parole release back in 1998, the court ordered him into a highly restricted treatment program. According to those initial records, remember the circuit court judge Robert McGregor? He was the one that didn't believe Jeff. He recommended that Jeff be placed in a program for mentally disordered type offenders. Well, that never happened because before Jeff was released, the mentally disordered offender program, which did require inpatient psychiatric treatment, was closed down. So what's supposed to happen in these cases? Why isn't there a plan B in place? Because we know that after all that time, this can happen. Places do close down, they go out of business, they don't exist anymore. One last thing I want to mention is that back in March of 2004, Lucia started a campaign for background checks for companies that contract with workers. And this was part of her promise to her sister. Lucia announced that she was going to campaign nationwide to pass legislation that would require businesses to run criminal background checks on employees before sending them on work calls. A Burdines department store spokesperson said they relied on subcontractors to perform background checks on their employees, essentially passing the blame. The spokesperson added that they would have never hired Jeff if they had known about his criminal history. After the arrest, they ended their relationship with the repair company that employed him. Lucia began a nonprofit group called CAUSE, which stands for Consumer Awareness of Unsafe Service Employment. It's too bad that this wasn't around sooner, because within weeks of Jeff pleading guilty to Sue's murder, another terrible murder occurred as a result of an offender hired as a contractor. Douglas McClymont embarked on a multi-state murder spree before taking his own life in North Carolina. He murdered 3 people and kidnapped 2 others, a 10-year-old Joshua Bryant and his grandmother, Lillian Martin. They disappeared while he was working for Ted Roberts Electric in Lake Helen. He had done electrical work on Lillian's home before coming back to commit this horrific act. Following the news that Douglas had worked as a contractor and had a criminal record of violent behavior, Lucia reminded everyone to always inquire about anyone entering their home. She said there are no guarantees. Even with background checks, some people slip through the cracks. But having a background check is better insurance than having none at all. The Sue Weaver Cause Foundation promotes comprehensive background investigations on all service workers in Sue's memory, believing their efforts can make a difference and protect families in their homes and workplaces. According to the Sue Weaver Cause Foundation, you should ask yourself these questions before hiring a contractor. Do you perform background checks on all your employees, contractors, and subcontractors? When and how often are these background checks done? Which background screening companies do you use to perform your background investigations? How can I be assured that the worker you're sending into my home has had a criminal background check done? This is so important, and there's no shame in asking these questions before hiring someone to work in your home, even if they come highly recommended by a friend. As a precaution, the foundation also recommends that you invite someone you know over for a cup of coffee while work is being done. If you can't have anyone there while the contractor works, let someone know everything that's going on, including when the workers are arriving and when they're supposed to leave. It's also perfectly fine to be on the phone with a friend during this time. They advise being careful about following the contractor around, especially in places like the basement or attic, and always staying close to an exit. Keep your wallet, purse, and valuables out of reach, because if there's one moment you turn your back, something can happen. But honestly, this caution came too late for Sue. By that time, it was way too late. She didn't do anything wrong. Jeff was just a sick person. You can take all the precautions in the world, but if someone truly sets out to harm you, sometimes there's nothing you can do to stop them. Lois Duncan was born on April 28, 1934, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Her parents were Joseph and Lois Steinmetz, internationally renowned magazine photographers, well known for taking photos of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. Lois grew up in Pennsylvania before moving to Sarasota, Florida, in her early teens. Her parents continued their work as circus photographers, and Lois spent a lot of her time surrounded by circus performers, which was very inspiring for her. Lois dreamed of being a writer since she was just a child. Many even say she was brilliant. At the age of 10, she submitted her first story to a publication, and at the age of 13, she sold her first article to a magazine called Calling All Girls. Throughout her high school years, she had been a regular contributor to teen magazines, including 17. Lois had a sense of humor. She wasn't afraid to make fun of herself and make light of more serious situations. She would commonly refer to herself as a shy bookworm and a dreamer. She enjoyed playing outside in the woods as much as she loved immersing herself in her reading and writing. Two of her favorite books were The Wizard of Oz and Mary Poppins. With photographers as parents, Lois had the opportunity to be the subject of beautiful pictures taken of her in places like this barrier island called Siesta Key in Florida. Not only that, but one photo of her was on the cover of Collier's magazine in the July 9th, 1949 edition. Lois graduated from Sarasota High School in 1952 and was accepted to Duke University. That's where she met her first husband, fellow student Joseph Cardozo. Lois wanted to start a family, so she dropped out of Duke in 1953. Even though she wasn't in college, it didn't stop her from working very hard. She wrote over 300 articles that were published in magazines. Lois and her first husband had 3 children, 2 daughters, Robin and Carrie, as well as a son named Brett. After 10 years of marriage, Lois and Joseph got a divorce, and she moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is where she taught for the journalism department at the University of New Mexico, while she continued to write for magazines and support her family by writing greeting cards. Despite not having a degree, she was able to land the job at the University of New Mexico because one of her friends was the chair of the journalism department. Lois was hired as a replacement based on her experience writing for magazines. She went on to author 48 books, from picture books for children to adult novels, but she's most recognized for her young adult thriller novels. Lois has been dubbed the Queen of Teen Thrillers by many critics and journalists, and is considered a pioneering figure of young adult fiction. It's pretty awesome, and she's so talented. Numerous titles have been named Best Books for Young Adults by the American Library Association and Junior Literary Guild. Her books have received Young Readers Awards in 16 states and 3 other countries. Lois earned the Margaret A. Edwards Award, which is sponsored by the School Library Journal and the Young Adult Library Services Association, in 1992. This award recognizes a living author who has produced an outstanding corpus of teenage writing. She explained, "I started writing for young adults because I was one. And you know what? She was good at it. She could really bring the characters and the story to life. Her stories resonated with teens because they were full of angst and challenges with fitting in, and of course the mystery and suspense of the characters being put into rather chilling situations." In 1965, Lois married an electrical engineer named Donald Arquette. They went on to have 2 children of their own, Donald Jr. and Caitlin. Lois and her children from her previous marriage took Donald's last name. This story revolves around Lois's youngest child, Kate Arquette. I'd like to briefly mention her other children because each one of them is highly gifted. Robin Arquette Birkin is a singer and composer who collaborated with Lois on a series of musical CDs for children called Songs of Childhood. Carrie Arquette writes children's books and is the co-owner and editor-in-chief of Cantata Publishing Company. Brett Arquette is the author of 3 adult novels, 2 of which are horror books, and Donnie Arquette is an extremely talented artist. Now, let's jump into when and where this story unfolds. It was 1989. 3 of the Arquette children, Brett, Don Jr., and Kate, were still living in Albuquerque, while Carrie and Robin were living in Dallas and Florida. I want to introduce you to Caitlin, or as she was affectionately known, Kate. Caitlin Claire Arquette was born on September 18, 1970. Lois said that when Kate was born, she had an odd little hollow on the ridge of her left cheekbone. Upon seeing it, Lois was worried. She said, "My baby has a hole in her face." but the doctors let her know she had nothing to worry about and that it wouldn't be permanent. Lois says it was permanent, however. Kate's family would refer to it as a misplaced dimple, and they would joke around, calling it God's fingerprint. Growing up as the youngest of Lois's 5 children, Kate was said to have trailed a little behind her brothers, but she was absolutely adored by her parents. Lois referred to her as her mini daredevil, because when Kate was a child, they were at a motel swimming pool, and Caitlin just decided to jerk her hand right out of Lois's and jump right into the deep end of the pool. Caitlin was described as funny, nice, absolutely clean-cut, and well-dressed. When she was in high school, she was outgoing, popular, and extremely ambitious. She had dreams of becoming a doctor one day. Caitlin was very studious. She was in the National Honor Society and took college courses during her senior year, continuing with those courses in the summer after graduation. Kate graduated with honors from Highland High School on June 14, 1989. By the time she graduated, Kate had been dating her boyfriend, Dong Nguyen, for about a year and a half. Nguyen was a Vietnamese immigrant who had lived in California before moving to Albuquerque with a friend. The two met at a coffee house. According to Kate, Nguyen hadn't had the perfect childhood. Kate described his childhood as horrific due to the difficult journey he endured to reach America. Nguyen was 8 years older than Kate, but she lied to her family, telling them he was only 4 years older. She knew they would not approve of her dating someone so much older. Kate and Nguyen had been living together for 6 weeks in an apartment that Kate rented just before she graduated, using a settlement payment she received from an insurance company after a car accident in California. Lois liked Nguyen. He spent a lot of time at their home with Kate, and he seemed nice. It appeared as though they got along well. Kate was employed as a supervisor of a clothing department at Pier 1 Imports, while she awaited the fall semester at the University of New Mexico, continuing to take summer classes in the meantime. It was July, and Kate was just starting to enjoy her summer vacation. However, things weren't going well with Nguyen. Despite how it looked from the outside, there were issues between the couple that they just couldn't resolve. On Sunday, July 16th, Kate stopped by her parents' home on her way to visit a friend, Sharon. Lois noticed that Kate's eyes appeared red and puffy. When she asked Kate about it, Kate explained that she was mad at Nguyen. Kate always cried when she was angry, and Lois knew this. She told her mother they had gotten into a fight the night before, and things had started to go downhill ever since they moved in together. She had finally had enough and was planning to break up with him. Kate's dad suggested that she move back home, but Kate refused. She said she loved her new apartment and was just sorry she ever let Nguyen move in with her. She regretted that decision so much. Kate's parents offered a few suggestions about how she could handle the situation. "I keep thinking to myself, this girl is so young. She's only 18 years old, dealing with a man that's close to 30. Lois told Kate that she could ask Nguyen to move out. Kate said she had, but he told her it was his place too. And then in Vietnam, women do whatever men tell them. However, Kate's name was the only one on the lease, and the utilities were in her name as well. Kate's parents were worried. When Lois asked Kate who this Sharon girl was, since they had never met her or even heard of her before, Kate explained that they met while she was at work because Sharon sold Hawaiian shaved ice outside of Pier 1 Imports. When Lois asked Kate what she had planned for that night, Kate said she was either going to stay at Sharon's or come back to her parents' house to sleep. She also insisted that her parents not let Nguyen know where she was if he called. Lois felt weird about this. She thought it was cruel not to tell him, worrying that he might assume Kate had gotten into a car accident or something if she never came home. But she promised Kate she wouldn't tell anyone, as long as Kate left Sharon's phone number so they could get a hold of her if needed. What happens next makes this moment even more eerie. Kate left her parents' home around 6:15 p.m. She wanted to give herself plenty of time to get to Sharon's house since she had never been there before. She also wanted to grab some ice cream to bring over. As she was leaving, she called out to her parents, "Later? I'll see you later, guys." Sharon had given Kate written directions to her house in Old Town, and everything seemed normal. That is until Lois and Don were woken up by a phone call just before midnight. The kind of call no parent ever wants to receive. It was from the emergency room at the University of New Mexico hospital. It was about Kate. There must have been so much fear inside these poor parents. They wanted to know everything, but all they were told was that Kate had been rushed to the ER after being injured. Nothing else was explained until they arrived at the hospital. As Lois and Don rushed over, Lois's mind was racing, trying to figure out what could have happened and how serious it was. Her biggest fear was that Kate had suffered a head injury because 2 years prior, Kate's cousin had been in a car accident that left him with brain damage. Kate had been deeply affected by what happened to her cousin, and Lois just didn't want that for her daughter. Here's what was known at that point. By 11 p.m., Kate's car was found off the side of the road. It appeared she had been in an accident, and it looked like she might have hit something, possibly another vehicle. She must have lost control of the car. It veered over the median and slammed into a telephone pole at the intersection of Lomas and Arno streets. The accident hadn't been called into 911 yet, it had just happened. An off-duty officer, Ronald Merriman, happened to be passing through the area right after the crash. He spotted 2 cars parked on the sidewalk, Kate's red Ford Tempo and a second vehicle, a gray Volkswagen Beetle. He stopped to see if anyone was injured. As Merriman drove past the cars, he reported the accident. At the time, he didn't believe there were any injuries because he saw a man standing next to Kate's car. The officer was wrong. It wasn't until he and the young man approached Kate's car to investigate that they found her seemingly unconscious, drenched in blood, and sprawled across both front seats. They didn't move her, but could hear her quietly moaning and crying. After the accident was reported, the first officer dispatched to the scene was Officer Mary Ann Wallace. She arrived within 40 seconds of receiving the call, a remarkably fast response. When she arrived, she saw only Kate's car on the sidewalk and Detective Merriman speaking with the man who had been standing next to Kate's vehicle. Merriman relayed that the driver of the Ford had been in an accident and informed her he had already called for an ambulance. As Wallace began examining Kate's car, while Kate was still unconscious in the front seat, she quickly realized something was off. The way the driver's side window was shattered didn't seem consistent with the rest of the damage to the car. Upon closer inspection, she began to suspect something more sinister. It appeared that the window had been shot out with a firearm. Her gut instinct and experience told her this was no ordinary accident. It was a crime scene. She radioed back to the station for backup. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Lois and Don arrived and were told by a nurse that Kate was alive, but in critical condition. The nurse informed them that they needed to prepare themselves for the possibility that they might lose her. Lois assumed that Kate had been in a bad car accident, but she was shocked to learn what had really happened. As I must censor certain words, you can imagine the devastation when it was revealed that a firearm had been used. Kate wasn't just in a car crash. She had been shot twice, either before or after the accident. The wounds were visible, one in her left cheekbone, the other above it, near her left temple. This suggested that the shooter had approached from the driver's side and fired through the window. But why? Kate was in critical condition. Machines, doctors, and tubing surrounded her, and Lois, in her shock, asked the nurse whether they were sure this was Kate. Many parents in that situation might wish it was all a mistake. However, the medical staff had identified Kate through a photo ID in her wallet. They were certain it was her. Kate had been somewhat recognizable before the injuries became more severe, but she was now placed on life support. The doctor delivered devastating news. While it was possible, it wasn't probable that Kate would ever regain consciousness. Lois and Don were in disbelief. Just hours earlier, Kate had been at their house, walking and talking, alive. Now she was clinging to life. They immediately called their other children to rush to the hospital. While Carrie, Don Jr., and Brett were able to make it relatively quickly, Robin, who was in Florida, couldn't get a flight until the next day. Back at the crime scene, Officer Merriman took down the name and phone number of the young man who had been next to Kate's car when he arrived. The man explained that he had been driving by saw Kate's car, and stopped to check if she was okay. He hadn't even had time to call 911 before Merriman arrived. More officers soon joined the scene, examined the area, and allegedly left before the paramedics arrived, although there is some dispute over this. After speaking briefly to the man with the Volkswagen Beetle, Merriman didn't question him further, satisfied with the information provided. He was focused on staying with Kate until the paramedics arrived. Officer Wallace, meanwhile, was directing traffic. However, things took an odd turn. When paramedics finally arrived, they stated in affidavits that there were no officers, police cars, or anyone else at the scene. They almost missed it entirely because no one was there to guide them. If this is true, it means Kate had been left unattended until medical help arrived. We'll dig deeper into this later. At the crime scene, police found a piece of paper with written directions to Sharon's house on the floorboard of Kate's car. Using this as their only lead, they headed over to Sharon Smith's house. Sharon told police that Kate had arrived around 9:30 p.m. They ate dinner together before heading to a friend's house to help with interior decorating. According to Sharon, Kate was extremely upset, bursting into tears several times for no apparent reason. Kate had also made Sharon call her apartment multiple times to see if her boyfriend, Nguyen, was home. Kate didn't want to speak to him, but she wanted to know where he was. Each time they called, there was no answer. Sharon called Kate's apartment for the final time at 10:40 p.m., but there was still no answer. As the night wound down, Kate decided to leave. Despite Sharon inviting her to stay, Kate insisted she needed to get home to study for her summer classes. Sharon admitted that she wasn't typically intuitive, but she had a bad feeling about Kate leaving that night. Kate left Sharon's house around 10:45 p.m. in her red Ford Tempo, heading east on Lomas Road, presumably on her way to her parents' house. After learning about Kate's argument with her boyfriend, Nguyen, the police decided to head over to Kate's apartment to interview him. At around 5 a.m., detectives knocked on the door. Nguyen answered, looking as though he had been sleeping. He had no idea what had happened to Kate and was shocked to learn the news from the detectives. When asked what he had been doing that night, Nguyen said he had gone out to play pool and have some drinks with friends. He said his friends dropped him off at the apartment around 10 p.m. As detectives searched the apartment, they found a note on the kitchen table. Nguyen said he found the note when he got home, and it read, "Han, where are you? I know you're still mad. I'm so sorry, okay? I miss you today. I went to my mom's house to return these books. I'll see you. Love." Nguyen told officers he believed the note was from Kate. But the question lingered. Who else could it be from, since Kate was the only one who lived with him? This struck the officers as odd. Nguyen claimed that he had waited for Kate to return that night, but she never came home. He also said that no one called him, and he hadn't been informed about anything. Kate's boyfriend, Nguyen, was in complete shock when detectives arrived at his apartment to question him. He didn't know why they were there, and no one explained what had happened to Kate. They asked if he owned a gun, and even conducted a gunshot residue test on his hands, which came back negative. Finally, before leaving, they told him what had happened. Kate had been shot. Nguyen rushed to the scene, but by then, Kate had already been taken to the hospital, so he joined her family there. When Nguyen arrived, Lois claimed she heard him whisper, "It's all my fault." He seemed to be replaying memories of his time with Kate, singing together, playing music, driving around, and how they had recently adopted a cat that they hadn't yet named. It was heartbreaking to think of everything they still had planned together, not knowing how tragically it would all end. At one point, Kate's condition worsened dramatically. She coded, meaning her heart had stopped. Doctors were able to revive her, but the situation was grim. Lois and Don, exhausted after a long and emotional night, went home to rest, but their phone kept ringing, making them anxious that it could be the hospital. Unable to relax, they decided to return to Kate's bedside. When they arrived, Carrie told them the devastating news. Kate had suffered a hemorrhage that flooded her brain stem, leaving her completely brain dead. The family began to say their final goodbyes. Robin, Kate's sister, finally arrived from Florida, just in time to say goodbye. Kate was pronounced dead on Monday, July 17th, at around 8:15 p.m. Her parents decided to donate her organs, knowing it was something Kate would have wanted. Her heart and lungs went to a man named Paul, who received a rare heart and lung transplant that saved his life. Her liver went to Los Angeles, her kidneys to San Francisco, and her pancreas was sent to Miami for research. The speed of events was overwhelming. Lois had recently been telling Kate how she was going to be out of her teens soon, and they had been looking forward to her 20th birthday. Tragically, Kate never lived to see 19. The loss was unbearable, and Kate's family needed answers. By July 20th, just a few days after Kate's death, a memorial service was held where family and friends shared memories of her. Childhood friend Molly Onan fondly recalled their family vacations together and camping trips in the Pecos Mountains. She remembered painting Kate's face like a clown, something Kate had loved. Kate had been a genuinely happy person, which made her tragic death even harder to process. Despite the heartwarming stories at her memorial, there were still few answers about what had really happened to Kate. The police believed it was a random shooting, possibly gang-related, as there had been a series of random crimes in the area around that time. One case involved Vincent Ray Chavez, who was shot in the back of the head while sitting in his car on June 24th. Another, on June 27th, saw Marvin Padilla stabbed 3 times in the heart after a traffic dispute, with his killer, Philip Baca, turning himself in. Then, on July 4th, Mark Sanchez was fatally shot following an argument and car chase. Finally, a man named Ricky Golios was shot during a drive-by while playing basketball with his uncle, who was also injured in the shooting. Given these incidents, police speculated that Kate's death might be another gang-related crime, though there was a clear difference. Kate was a woman, while the other victims were all men. Unlike in the previous cases, no one came forward to confess, and the police had no real leads except for the one witness who had stopped to help Kate. If it hadn't been for the gunshot wounds, the police might have dismissed it as a car accident, assuming Kate fell asleep at the wheel or was involved in a hit and run. But the shooting made it clear this was no accident. Then, new information began to surface from people close to Kate, hinting at something more. And this is where things get a little interesting, confusing, and odd. Lois would not believe for a second that this was a random crime. She took it upon herself to investigate this case on her own a few weeks after Kate's death. When looking at phone records, Lois discovered that there had been 3 phone calls made from Kate's apartment on the night she was pronounced dead. So this was after the accident, while Kate was lying in the hospital fighting for her life. Was it Nguyen? No, because he had been with them at the hospital, so she knew it wasn't him. And she believed there should have been no one else in that apartment. So who made these calls? 2 of them were to one number, and the third was to a different number. The second number Lois had recognized, so she went to check her directory to find out if the phone number was in there, and it was, written down in her own writing. This was the phone number that Kate had given her mother back in March. It was supposed to be the phone number of Nguyen's sister, the one that lived in California. Kate and Nguyen took a trip to California in March for Kate's spring break. They were there to go to Disneyland, and they were supposed to be staying with the sister. Well, it turns out there was a completely different reason that they made a trip to Southern California, and it was very surprising and troubling. Lois couldn't believe it. How could her 18-year-old daughter be involved in a major criminal organization? But it was true. Could this be why she was potentially targeted? It made a lot of sense, but it needed to be investigated a lot more. They needed more information to figure out how she was even involved in something like this. The calls were made just minutes after Kate was pronounced dead. It's a little bit weird. Nguyen was at the hospital. The apartment should have been empty. I kinda said this already, so what was going on here? Why would somebody be there? Well, apparently Kate admitted everything to her sister, Carrie. She said the truth was that this trip hadn't been everything that it was made out to be. While in California, Nguyen staged a car accident in the car that Kate rented in her own name, with Lois's credit card. This was an insurance scheme, and it was orchestrated by a large group of members of the Vietnamese community that Nguyen knew from back when he lived in Southern California. Nguyen rear-ended a car, which turned out to be driven by people that were in on the scheme. All the individuals involved in this accident complained of soft tissue injuries, and they were all treated by a doctor. A paralegal out of Southern California handled the insurance claim, and eventually both Nguyen and Kate were given $1,500 as part of the settlement. It's believed that the doctor and the paralegal were also part of the insurance scam. This is the money that Kate used to rent her apartment, in which Nguyen started to live. Wow, okay, this is intense. She's 18 years old, and obviously her boyfriend is a bad influence. Lois went to the police about this and gave them the information. She was speculating that perhaps this was a potential motive behind Kate's death. She knew that Kate had issues with Nguyen, and Kate had mentioned breaking up with him. She questioned whether this Vietnamese group thought that Kate was going to blow the whistle on the illegal operation. Lois believed that they could have had one of their members get rid of Kate or hired someone to do it. Police also informed Lois that Nguyen didn't have a sister in California. These calls made from Kate's apartment had been to the paralegal in California, presumably the same one involved in the insurance scam, helping stage all of these fake accidents. This was a lot for the family to take in. It sounds like Nguyen was bad news. However, it seems as though Nguyen took Kate's death very hard. He went to Lois one night and told her that he was having trouble sleeping. She gave him 2 sleeping pills, but Nguyen asked her for the whole bottle. Lois ended up refusing to give him any more. From that moment on, she was afraid of what he might do. It didn't matter. Nguyen would end up in the hospital regardless. Only 5 days after Kate was shot, Nguyen took a 4-inch knife and turned it on himself, severely puncturing his stomach. Oh my God, this is a mess. Once Nguyen was stable, detectives interviewed him about why he would do this to himself. He told them that he had been distraught and depressed since Kate's death. He felt like everyone was blaming him for it. Does he have a guilty conscience? I don't know. In the event it was true that he got involved with criminals and then this happened, he would be guilty by association. That's going to be a terrible situation. But he's still a person of interest in the actual crime. Lois visited Nguyen while he was in the hospital, and she told him that she didn't think he was responsible for Kate's death, but she believed that he knew who was. She told him he needed to decide whether or not he loved Kate enough to tell the truth. Lois claimed that, at this point, Nguyen told her, and I'm quoting, "I know, I'm deciding." Lois called the police after leaving the hospital and told them this information. Allegedly, a friend of Kate's had also claimed that, on the night of Kate's shooting, Nguyen had called her and said, "Kate's dead." They shot her, before the police ever even arrived at his apartment. I don't know about this. Sometimes wires can be crossed, but it is weird if true. Police brought Nguyen in after he was released from the hospital, and at this point, he denied ever saying anything like that to Lois. He said he had no idea who did this to Kate. He also told them that his car accident in California was not staged for insurance purposes. Something else happened shortly after Kate's death. Nguyen called Lois and told her he had been locked out of the apartment. Lois called the apartment manager and said, "Listen, I'm fine with Nguyen staying there." However, the apartment manager told her there was no way he was going to let Nguyen stay there. He told her that he didn't think it was a good idea, that Nguyen was bad news. This is when the apartment manager let Lois know he wasn't sure exactly what was going on with Nguyen and Kate. But there had been times when Kate had come running over to his door, begging to sleep on his couch, telling him she was scared. Kate even asked him to change the locks at one point, which he did, but after that, windows ended up being smashed in because Nguyen's friends got in the way. The apartment manager also informed Lois that Kate had locked Nguyen out one night, and he ended up kicking in the door. Okay, yeah, this guy is not good news. He's bad news. Lois asked investigative reporter Mike Gallagher to look into Kate's relationship with Nguyen. She felt that something wasn't right. There were problems the police were not looking into, and they were failing to go deeper. Gallagher met up with the landlord, who claimed or believed that Kate was afraid of Nguyen and his friends. He related to Gallagher that Kate and Nguyen argued mostly about a few topics: money, Nguyen wanting to move back to California and the way Nguyen treated her. The landlord claimed that in one instance, Kate had run to his apartment, like he had told Lois, and she told him that she was scared Nguyen was going to hurt her. Gallagher took a look at that note that Kate had supposedly left on the night of the shooting, and he compared it to other samples of her writing. To him, it was obvious that the note was not written by Kate, and that Nguyen had been lying to police right after she had been shot. Months were passing, and there were still no solid answers or leads in this case, until November when a tip came in from Crime Stoppers. This identified 4 potential suspects in Kate's case. More tips would come in over the following weeks. Police still believed and told the family that Kate was chased down and shot on the corner of Lomas and John Street. Her car then proceeded to travel 719 feet, cross over 2 traffic lanes, hop the median, cross 3 more lanes, go up on the sidewalk, pass the intersection, and crash into a light pole. They say the location of the shooting was defined by a large pile of broken glass on Lomas and John. However, there was nothing to document the existence of that glass. It was not gathered up as evidence, nor was it even photographed. I keep thinking, is this another botched investigation by the police? The Arkham family and their investigators think that the crime scene may have been altered before investigators got there. The crime scene technicians got to Kate late because they were working at another crime scene where there was a police shooting. Reports state that the technicians were met at the crime scene by Sergeant John B. Gallegos. When investigators dug deeper, they realized that many of these reports were not based on first-hand accounts of the crime scene. They were given to the crime scene technicians from information passed on by Sergeant Gallegos. This man was reportedly a rogue cop. He was known to party at the chop shop on Arno Street, which is 1/2 block north of the crime scene. He had since been fired from the Albuquerque Police Department for burglarizing a liquor store while on duty. So could this be more convoluted? Arno Street was right behind the chop shop where stolen cars were stored. It also served as a drug distribution center. This was a known hangout for rogue cops, including Gallegos. Several of those cops known to hang out there had since been convicted of felonies. Kate may have been in a position where she learned about some of these activities because some of the cars were stolen by Vietnamese car thieves. The owner of the chop shop said that he knew Kate. I'm just in shock by this. How in the world would a girl like her get involved in any of this? Look how innocent she looks. I mean, I'm not sure any of this is true, but why would all these people make this up? Well, on January 11, 1990, 6 months after the shooting, an informant met with police and told them that 4 men were involved in the crime. One of them was Juve Escobedo, who was driving the car. A man named Miguel Garcia was the one who used the firearm on Kate, along with Robert Garcia and Dennis Martinez. This informant also told the detective that Robert Garcia may have information about the whole incident. Just a few days later, on January 17, 1990, Robert Garcia was brought into police headquarters and interrogated for 2 hours. He admitted that he was out with friends on the night Kate was shot, and that Kate was shot by Miguel on a dare. After Robert Garcia's interrogation, police ended up arresting Dennis Martinez, Miguel Garcia, and Juve Escobedo. According to Robert, it was Miguel who shot the gun, firing what he claimed were 3 shots at Kate's car. Police also discovered that Juve had recently sold his car, a brown Chevrolet Camaro. This was significant because, on the night of the shooting, a truck driver reported seeing a brown Camaro chasing a young woman in a car that was said to be similar to Kate's in the area where she would later be found. Later, he told police that he believed there were 2 or 3 people in that vehicle. This tip had initially been dismissed, but it seemed to be much more relevant now. Police believed that the men had been out joyriding and that Kate just became a random victim. In November of 1989, when Miguel Garcia and Juve Escobedo were interviewed, they both denied any involvement in the shooting. A tape recorder was secretly placed in their holding cell, and they continued to deny their involvement. Dennis Martinez, however, initially told detectives that he had been in the car when Miguel shot at Kate. He also said that he had been drunk at the time and hadn't seen Miguel shoot anyone. but heard the gunshots. Just when police began to think that they were making headway in this case, it all started to unravel at the seams. Police discovered that Robert Garcia, the man they interrogated, who provided them with all that information, the names of all the other men, had been in jail on the night that Kate was shot. When asked about this, Robert said that he actually heard about the shooting from Dennis Martinez and that he was just scared during this interrogation, so he told police what they wanted to hear. This confuses the hell out of me. This is a real issue during interrogations. Under pressure, people crack and then they admit to things that they didn't even do. When I think about this, all I can think about is, why would you rather go to prison? Why are you not scared of prison, but you're scared of the police and you tell them something you didn't do? Miguel Garcia, the man who was suspected of using the firearm, had his house searched and they found several weapons, but all of them were ruled out as being involved in Kate's case. The truck driver's statement was contradictory as well, because the sighting of the car chase would have occurred while Kate was still at Sharon's. The truck driver also gave detectives a partial license plate number for the Camaro, and it didn't match Escobedo's. Wait, get this. One of the cops that also hung out at this chop shop, the rogue cop, was Officer Matt Griffin. He had been sentenced to life in prison during this time for multiple bank robberies as well as the murder of a witness. He was arrested 1 week before Kate was killed, although his accomplices were never identified. So I thought maybe there could be a connection there. Then, the man whose knife was used when Nguyen was attempting to take his life, allegedly he was using a knife that belonged to one of Officer Griffin's friends. Why would you need to borrow a knife for that? That's really weird, and there are just so many of these random connections. On top of all that, the supervisor of the Albuquerque Police Department was not happy that Lois was questioning the actions of what they described as their impeccable police department. After Lois began to go public with all the information she had, especially about mistakes that she thought police could have made, a bunch of different families of over a dozen New Mexico victims decided to take a good, long, hard look at that impeccable department, as well as other investigative agencies in the Albuquerque area. The message they were sending out was that the citizens of Albuquerque were afraid of their cops. Police in New Mexico have a long and ongoing track record of corruption. In February of 1990, Dennis Martinez was released without charges, and in April of 1991, all the charges against Miguel Garcia and Juve Escobedo were dropped due to insufficient evidence. After these men were released, Kate's family urged the police to bring Nguyen back in and interview him. They did, and Nguyen was much more open this time. During this interview, he was honest. He told them about the insurance scam and that at least 10 other Vietnamese men were involved. He also said that he lied about being involved in the insurance scam because a friend told him to. It was this friend, who is believed to be the one who made the calls out of Kate's apartment the night that she was pronounced dead. After Nguyen's second interview, his sister and brother-in-law had to come in and get him and drive him back to Kansas City, where they lived. The reason for this was that he needed to be monitored. He was not doing well, whether anyone thought he was involved in it or not. There was something going on in him, whether it was guilt or just being distraught that someone he loved was killed. Kate's family didn't even know that this sister of Nguyen's existed. What Lois wanted everyone to remember and thought was very important for the police was that looking into Nguyen's friends was vital because they were involved with large-scale organized criminal activities in Los Angeles and multi-million-dollar insurance frauds. Lois didn't think that the police ever took that seriously, and maybe not. That's why Lois was compelled to use her own notoriety to get the word out about Kate's death. In 1992, Lois wrote a book entitled Who Killed My Daughter? This book was basically a brief of everything that happened in her case. And the night of the shooting and what happened in the investigation, it was also a plea for any information that people may have related to Kate's murder. With the publication of Lois's book, Kate's case started to garner more attention. It was featured on Good Morning America, Larry King Live, The Sally Jesse Raphael Show, Sightings, and Unsolved Mysteries. What happened in July of '89? Kate left our home at about 6:15, saying she was going to her girlfriend's house for dinner. She also told us she was breaking up with her Vietnamese boyfriend, and that if he called trying to find her, not to say where she was, she would come back to our house to sleep that night. When she left the girlfriend's house at about 11:15, she was chased down and shot twice in the head within minutes. How did the police thoroughly investigate this? They did a good job at that point, yes. And then our family began to find out some things that made us think differently. The family was desperate for tips and answers. I wish this wasn't the reality of the situation, but this case ends up going cold. Year after year, there's still information coming in, but none of it really seemed to be promising. There was one tip in 1995 from a private investigator named Pat Caristo. She was watching Sally Jesse Raphael, and it was featuring Kate's case. She contacted the show and said she had information that she thought Lois and the police department had missed. Caristo had her own private investigation business, and she was the one that was hired by a lawyer who was working on the insurance claim related to Kate's case. So she was looking into things related to Kate already. And as she was reading police reports from that time, she learned that the young man who had been at Kate's car whenever the police arrived was 21-year-old Paul Apodaca. He had been reported to be driving the gray Volkswagen Beetle. Witnesses also reported having seen this vehicle in the area before that. This was the man that said, "I'm just passing through. I was on this well-traveled road, saw what happened, got out, wanted to know if I could help." Police had taken his contact information and then let him leave. Kate's family said that they had no real idea who pulled the trigger on Kate, but the one thing they felt very strongly about was that she was not shot randomly by people that were just out on a spree, having fun shooting a pretty girl in a red car. They believed she was killed because she was going to expose the illegal activities involving her boyfriend and his companions. The case still remained cold. There were no bullets and no casings that were ever found. So there was no way to determine if the small caliber bullets that were in Kate's head were the same caliber as the ones that were in the door frame of her car. If you take a look right here, this is the door frame. The size of the hole in the frame seems to suggest there were maybe two different firearms. It's all too confusing. As Caristo continued to look into the case herself, she came to the conclusion that she believed Kate had not been shot while she was driving and then veered off the road. She believed that Kate had most likely been hit and forced off of the road, which she claims is supported by the damage to the left member of her car. Then she thinks that after Kate crashed into the light pole, she put her car in park, and then the shooter approached her and shot at close range through the window. This evidence, of course, is all contrary to the police's version of events, so there was so much debate about what happened. Lois claimed that the Albuquerque Police Department had maintained for years that the suspects they initially arrested, Miguel Garcia, Dennis Martinez, and Juve Escobedo, were responsible for what happened to Kate, but they just did not have enough evidence to convict them, and that's why they basically closed the case. An online campaign ran in 1997 and urged the public all across the United States to email New Mexico officials and convince them that Kate's case needed to be turned over by the Albuquerque Police Department to another agency. I agree, a second opinion and fresh eyes is always a good choice in a case like this. In 2003, the Bernalillo County Cold Case Squad looked into Kate's case, and at this point they determined that they also believed Kate had been shot after her car collided with a light pole. They said that due to the accuracy of the shots, it appeared as though they had been fired at close range and not at a moving target. Wow, so why? It seems more and more like it was planned now that she was targeted. Lois would not give up. She insisted that the truck driver go under hypnosis to see if he could recall any more information about the night that he claimed to have spotted Kate's car. This truck driver agreed, and I know this is a non-conventional way of investigating a crime, but I think you're desperate during this session. The truck driver said Kate was being chased, and that she was chased twice that evening, once on her way to Sharon's and again when she left to go back to her parents' house. He said he saw a girl in a car that resembled Kate being chased and harassed by Hispanic men in a Camaro in the same area of Lomas. But he reported that Kate's Ford Tempo was headed west in the direction of Sharon's house, not east in the direction that Kate was driving to her parents when she ultimately got killed. The truck driver witnessed this incident over an hour before the shooting. At the same time, police reports say that Kate was driving to Sharon's house. It just still wasn't adding up. Anyway, they were trying to make it work, it just wasn't. Another thing that I thought was interesting, I'm not against it, but I'm not sure how you feel about it, is psychic investigations. On June 20th, 1994, psychic Robert Petro in Sedona, Arizona, taped a trance reading in reference to Kate's case. How do you feel about this? Because I want to say something. In law school, we did learn about psychics and how police do use them. They aren't the end-all be-all, and who knows how it works, but they are used in criminal investigations and have proven to be accurate in some cases. Like I was saying, I guess families are so desperate they're going to try anything. Are you wondering what I was wondering? What was said in this trance reading? Because I know I wanted to know. This was all from a website, by the way, that the family owned and operated called realcrimes.com. It was dedicated to families who were trying to find answers and believed their loved ones' cases included police corruption. The motto on this website was, "Real cover-up and corruption by law enforcement, real family frustration and heartbreak." On the section of the site dedicated to Kate's case, there is a disclaimer that says information from psychics, even the most gifted ones, is seldom totally accurate, as it's based upon impressions received by extrasensory perception and is subject to various interpretations. I've used a psychic before. I pretty much do it all in good fun. Sometimes it helps guide me in a way because it helps me think about things. Tell me your thoughts. Now that we know all of that, this is what was reported by psychic Robert Petro during the trance session. This is what he says he saw. Are you ready? I'm going to tell you when this begins and when it ends because I'm going to be talking a lot right here. This is everything he says he's seeing in this trance-like state. He says, "I see more than one car. The girl is stopped. Her boyfriend is having a very serious dispute with a trio of other young men. They seem to be arguing over this girl, and they reprimand him. They're afraid that he has revealed information to her. One man walks within range of this young girl and shoots her. I don't feel that the car pulled alongside. I feel that everyone was stationary, and then right after the shooting, they left. I feel that the gun was thrown out of a window. I feel that evidence will surface that this group of boys belong to an Asian mafia. This is a close clan, and they will do anything to eliminate exposure. I feel that new evidence will surface because one of the men will be apprehended and will try to make a deal. I feel that the boyfriend is basically a good person but was hooked up with the wrong people. I feel that his life is now in danger. He will be constantly inconsistent with his information. Right in the heart of Albuquerque, there's some sort of garage or warehouse where they're doing alterations on automobiles. I feel that it also includes local people, meaning Mexicans. I feel that they have altered documentation and paperwork, that it all appears to be forgeries. I feel that we are dealing with a lot of different players who are very dangerous, but the brains are the Asians. The obstruction of the Albuquerque Police Department in the investigation of this murder only involves a couple of people. It does not involve the department in general. I feel that by the time the investigation got into the hands of the case investigators, it was already diluted, and all of the evidence wasn't given to them. Those who collected the evidence are the ones who hid the evidence. I feel that the Albuquerque Police Department are standing and fighting, and they are right to do that because the evidence was tampered with before it even got to the police department. The Hispanic males who were arrested were used as scapegoats. I somehow see them connected, but then I don't see them connected. But do they know something? The answer is absolutely yes. I feel that someday a person is going to come forward who's just riddled with guilt. He or she can't live with this anymore. That's when you will get your answers. Okay, That was the end of that trance-like state revelation, feelings of this psychic. Like, I don't think you need to be psychic to put some of these things together, but that's just me. Let me know your thoughts. I want to know, have you used a psychic? Do you believe in them? Have you ever experienced a psychic being correct about something? Like I said, interesting information. I will definitely revisit some of these theories later. From 1989 to 2003, there were a number of reports of possible witness intimidation. This to me is very significant, so I wanted to quickly share some of those with you. Okay, on July 21st, the day of Kate's funeral, 2 injuries happened to people that saw Kate last night. Sharon had to miss the funeral because she was in the emergency room due to a severe injury to her arm that she said happened because her dog bit her, but it's believed that the scar suggests something else. Now, all this information is found on Lois's website. I just want to make sure you know that I don't know where it came from, but this is Lois's account of what happened. This was also the same day that Newman allegedly attempted to take his own life with the weapon that belonged to someone else. This happened in the room of one of the men who was one of his alibis for the night of the shooting. On August 2, 1989, Newman's drug dealer apparently ended up with a slashed wrist. They said it was self-inflicted, but get this, that same day, 2 of the drug dealer's friends who were there when it happened also had their arms and wrists slashed. What? Again, I don't know the sources of this information. It was on the family's website dedicated to uncovering the truth about what happened to Kate. But that seems really odd. Why are all these people getting injured? In February of 1990, one of the men that had allegedly been involved in the drive-by when Miguel used the firearm, Dennis Martinez, was found lying in a doorway with his arm slashed too. 2 years later, on February 4th, 1992, shortly after charges were dropped and he was released from prison, Miguel Garcia was shot in the lower portion of his right abdomen, and the bullet came out of his back. It was so close to his spine that the doctors thought he was going to be paralyzed. He ended up surviving. Allegedly, this was also self-inflicted. The last one mentioned on the site was from September 24th, 2003, when Robert Garcia, the alleged eyewitness to Miguel in the car, who later turned out to be in prison at the time of the shooting, was found dead of a drug overdose. Someone had dragged his body into an alley and left it there. No wonder this case was so hard to solve, because there are just so many theories and weird things like this happening. But here's my train of thought. The people we're talking about are criminals, and if you don't know by now, criminals get themselves in interesting, violent, and dangerous situations. So it's not really that uncommon for these risk situations. I don't even know. But as far as, somebody in an alleyway or some of these other things, it's like, oh, you play with fire, you're gonna get burned. Later in 2013, Lois wrote a sequel to her book Who Killed My Daughter, entitled One to the Wolves, on the Trail of a Killer. There were basically 3 major theories at this point. The first one was the Vietnamese connection, which Kate's family strongly believed in, but police had ruled out a long time ago. Lois said at one point that since her family started looking into what happened to Kate, they had received several death threats, and that she believed they were from members of a Vietnamese gang. The second theory was that it was those 3 men who had been previously arrested, but their conflicting statements and the lack of evidence just made it impossible for them to be charged. This was the theory that the police stood by the most. The third theory was that that man by the car, Paul Apodaca, had something to do with it. That police didn't do their due diligence, they dropped the ball, and they didn't question him enough or get enough information from him. I'd like to know, what did they do when he was on the scene? What questions did they ask him? Did they search his car? Did they ask him if he had a gun? Did they look if there was any blood on him? Why didn't they do a gunshot residue test on him? Why, when this guy's on the scene? Did he have a criminal record? I mean, what was the proper procedure, and was it followed? At this point in her career, Lois decided she could no longer write horror stories anymore, so she switched to writing children's books. She said that she couldn't continue writing about young women in life-threatening situations. It hit way too close to home for her. Kate's family saw 4 potential motives for Kate's death: Asian crime in New Mexico and California, drug smuggling, New Mexico drug activities, which is kind of the same thing as drug smuggling, police corruption. I don't know why, I guess I do, but I kept thinking this may really have been random. I said that twice. There are so many crazy people out there on drugs, not even smuggling, not even in crime rings, but straight up off the rails. Lois put so much work and effort into trying to solve her daughter's case, and sadly Lois passed away at the age of 82 on June 15, 2016, so she never got to see any justice done. It was very questionable at that time whether justice would ever be done. Lois passed away at her home in Bradenton, Florida, and the cause of death was never disclosed. However, her husband said that she had suffered a series of strokes in the years prior. I guess I just have a really curious mind, but I would like to know how she passed away. Why not disclose it? But most of all, I wanted to know what actually happened to Kate. You're finally going to find out. This case was on Unsolved Mysteries. They were soliciting tips from all over the country, but nothing came out of it until 32 years later, on July 20th, 2021, almost exactly 32 years after Kate's murder. Yes, 32 years. It's unbelievable. You know, all those series, all the hard work that Lois put in, all the speculation, the private investigators, the alleged police corruption, the psychics, none of that had to do with Kate's death for the most part. Instead, a serial killer was responsible. He had gotten away with his crimes for 3 decades. 3 decades. Think about that for one moment. That is crazy. Everything came to somewhat of a close when University of New Mexico campus police officers arrested a man who was wandering around the school property. They thought he was probably scouting for his next victim. Who, you ask? Paul Apodaca. Do you remember this name? Because it makes me so mad to think that 32 years ago this man was right in front of the police. Worse yet, he was right in front of the crime scene because he created the crime scene. He was Kate's killer all along. No, he didn't stop his car because he was worried about whether Kate was okay. Not at all. Paul, who was 53 at the time of his arrest, had a long history of violence, especially against women. He was arrested in 1995 for forceful intercourse with his 14-year-old stepsister. Paul was homeless when the police officers apprehended him, and he was arrested on a probation violation. It was at this point, while being questioned, that Paul admitted that he had a deep hatred for women. It was during his intake interview that Paul came out with a shocking truth, a secret that he was keeping. So maybe the psychic was right in one way. He said, "I feel that someday a person is going to come forward who is riddled with guilt. He or she can't live with this anymore, and that's when you will get your answers." Well, that was true. You'll hear it from Paul himself in a moment because I have that interview to play. It features Paul confessing to his crimes. The first confession he made was not about Kate. He said that he had committed several murders and had forced himself on several women in the 80s and 90s. Now the thing is, police hear this all the time. Sometimes criminals try to barter to get off on other charges to make a deal. However, the police have a duty to investigate every confession or claim, and it took them several months to look into all the evidence and confirm that Paul had information that only the killer would know. Sadly, that information checked out. First came the indictment for the death of Althea Oakley. I know that this video is about Kate, but if you know me, you would know I can't pass over a victim without giving them the respect and attention that they deserve. Just because Kate's case was more widely publicized because of her mother's career doesn't mean that these other women aren't important. So I briefly want to tell you about Althea and how she died. On June 22, 1988, 21-year-old Althea was walking home alone when Paul spotted her. He went after vulnerable women who were easy targets because they were alone. He came up behind her, grabbed her, and stabbed her 5 times in the chest and stomach for no other reason but the fact that he could. She wouldn't have been alone that night, but she had gone into an argument with her boyfriend at the frat house on the University of New Mexico campus and was going home upset. I would feel so much guilt. I know it's not her boyfriend's fault, but it must haunt him, because I know it would haunt me. Police say Apodaca told them he wanted to confess to the crimes. What he told officers about the Oakley case matched the crime scene and evidence. She was stabbed to death walking home near TVI, which is now CNM. He said he planned to rape her because he hated women, but he ended up killing her. After Paul's confession about Althea, a witness actually came forward. And we do have a video. It's a little hard to understand her, but she tried to help her the night of the attack. She wanted to remain anonymous when they interviewed her on TV, but she lived right in front of where this happened. She said that she heard screams, so she ran out to see what happened, and she saw Althea. There was just so much blood, and it had been so long, but she could remember some things. The one thing she said that she remembered was that Althea did not want to die, and that made me sad. That made me sad. She said that Althea collapsed right there in front of her house, and at that point she realized it was nothing she could do, so she just called 911, and they later informed her that Althea didn't make it. I'm gonna let you hear what she had to say, but she was just really glad that he was finally caught. It was a lot of blood, and like I said, it's been so long ago, but I remember she didn't want to die, and she collapsed right there. I'm glad that they found him, and I hope it gives him life, because he didn't deserve that. Paul told police that he grew up in that neighborhood where he carried out that crime, and they were able to confirm all the details. Next came his second bombshell confession. He was responsible for the shooting death of 13-year-old Stella Gonzalez. She was walking with a friend at 1:15 in the morning on September 9th, 1988, and this was completely random. He just drove up, aimed for the back of her head, shot, and drove away. I will never understand the level of evil, this level of heartlessness, especially as a mother, that life means nothing to that person. Then in August of 2021, Paul Apodaca was arrested and charged with Althea Oakley's murder. He was charged with Stella's murder in December of 2021, and finally, just a couple of months ago in February 2022, he was indicted for Kate's murder. Police claimed that he included details in his confession that only the killer would know. Paul is currently awaiting trial. When learning of his confession, Kate's sister Carrie, who is now a criminologist mostly due to Kate's case, is still critical of the Albuquerque Police Department for never questioning Paul and letting him walk away from that crime scene. Carrie said it's only solved because someone stepped forward and confessed. That had nothing to do with the police investigation or lack of it over the years. Carrie feels confident that despite the fact Lois is no longer alive to witness Paul finally being convicted and justice found for Caitlin, she feels that Lois's spirit is there and she's looking down. Carrie went on to say that when Paul took Kate from this world, he also took everyone else. It caused the family to grow apart, and after that, the family was broken. These horrific crimes have far-reaching ripple effects into so many people's lives. It is not just the victim dying, it's the future that victim would have had with all the people in their life. It's all the people they'll never meet. It's all the things that their family will never get to see them do. To think that people can just callously just pluck someone from this earth and end it is beyond my understanding. I always try to leave you with a message, something important that I learned from this case. I guess the one thing that stood out to me was, never be alone. I know that's really hard, but they always say like 2 in, 2 out. If you go somewhere with your friends, don't leave them behind. I know it's hard. I was just listening to a story the other night. One of my friends said that a friend of hers met a date on Tinder and then left with him and left her there behind. And maybe you're with other people at a bar, but don't leave your friends behind. 2 in, 2 out. You go with someone, you leave with someone. We can't predict these things. I don't think there's any way Kate could have stopped Paul from doing what he did that night because he was determined to do it. But I guess I'll say what I always do. Please be grateful for everyone in your life. Tell them how much you love them. Cherish every moment because you truly don't know when it's going to be your last.